Hey guys, tonight we're headed into one of the roughest years of your life, and trust me, you probably won't survive this. Welcome to a medieval famine year. The weather has turned against you, the granaries are bare, and the lord of the manor still expects his taxes, even if your entire family is running on boiled weeds and tears. This isn't just a bad harvest, it's a slow, grinding descent into the kind of hunger that doesn't just pinch, it devours. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to frost on the inside of your thatched cottage. The fire went out in the night again. Fuel's too precious to waste on sleep. Outside, the fields are hard and pale, and the stubbled earth from last year's harvest is dotted with leftover stones and broken stalks, but very little hope. Normally by now you'd be checking winter stores or maybe doing minor repairs to tools in anticipation of the spring ploughing season. But not this year. There's barely anything to repair with, and even less to plant. You see, the previous summer was wet, relentlessly wet. Rain fell in sheets day after day, flattening crops and flooding low-lying areas. Wheat rotted in the fields, barley moulded in the sacks. The harvest came late, meagre, sickly, and riddled with fungus. You remember the desperation of pulling up a clump of leeks and discovering they'd turned to mush. Your neighbours' pigs, once fat and squealing, were slaughtered early out of fear they wouldn't survive the winter. Most were salted or smoked, poorly, and now lie in barrels that are more worry than comfort. The grain stores in your village's communal barn are almost empty. Your family's personal stash? Gone. You stretched it as far as you could, cutting your bread with chalky ground beans, even bark to make it last. But you knew in your gut, and literally in your gut, that it wouldn't hold out until spring. And now here you are. Hunger isn't just a rumble anymore. It's something that lives with you. It alters your thoughts, makes your body feel hollow and foreign. You glance at your child curled up near the hearth, thin as a sapling, wrapped in a tunic you've restitched a dozen times. Her face has that pinched look, eyes too large, cheeks too sharp. You stopped feeling real hunger days ago. What you feel now is more like static, but you still have to do something today. Maybe you can trade that cracked wooden spoon for a handful of millet, if the miller hasn't left the village. You step out and head toward the common path, mud sucking at your worn shoes. Along the way you pass others, faces you recognise but barely, drawn, silent, each of them with their own empty bowl, their own plan to somehow survive the day. People talk in low voices. The Lord Steward rode through last week demanding grain taxes as if the fields had given plenty. He took what was left from some, more out of principle than utility. After all, what's a half cart of mouldy barley to someone whose larder is stacked with dried figs and smoked boar? Still, you saw the cart loaded. You saw the sacks, pale and frayed, disappear down the hill, and you saw the crying afterward. You remember your neighbour, a man once known for singing while threshing, sitting on a stump, hands covering his face after the steward left. He had hidden his last grain sack under a pile of kindling, but his wife panicked and gave it up. That was 4 days ago. You haven't seen either of them since. It's not that medieval peasants didn't know famine was possible. It was always there, just beyond the edge of the next season. But this feels different. There are no rabbits in the woods anymore. Even the birds seem to have left. And the snare you set yesterday came up empty again. Bait unmarred. The idea of spring planting feels laughable when your body has started to devour itself for fuel. You reach the edge of the village where a few others are gathered. Someone's managed to start a small fire with a bit of peat and dried dung. The smell is awful, but no one complains. There's talk of someone boiling shoe leather, trying to make a broth. You're not sure if it's true, but honestly, it wouldn't surprise you. That old boot in your hut. You've been eyeing it. You just don't know how to soften it enough to chew. Someone else swears they saw a few mushrooms growing under the old oak trees to the east. Dangerous idea, really. Even in good years, mushrooms are a gamble. And now, with empty bellies and no margin for error, it's like licking a knife to see if it's sharp. Still, you file the information away for tomorrow. Maybe. One woman, hunched and wild-eyed, tells a story of her grandfather eating clay mixed with goose fat during the Great Famine of 1315. She says it like it's both a warning and a recipe. Someone else mutters about the hunger bread being passed around at the abbey, the kind that tastes like sawdust and sour apples. Better than nothing, they say, but not by much. Historically, famine years like this weren't rare in medieval Europe. They came in cycles, every decade or so, sometimes closer together. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, which you might actually be in right now, struck after years of overpopulation, soil exhaustion, and relentless rains. What made it worse was the lack of storage or transport infrastructure. If one region had a bad harvest, the next one over might have had a decent one. But getting the food there, not easy, not cheap, not likely. There's a scholarly debate about whether communities adapted long-term or just endured. Some argue that famine was a form of demographic correction, a cold term that ignores the actual human cost. Others believe peasants were deeply resilient, with layers of social cooperation and foraging skills modern people have lost entirely. You're living proof of the latter, or trying to be. As the fire crackles, someone ladles a bit of something into your bowl. You don't ask what it is, it's warm and that's enough, you sip. It tastes like water and ashes with a faint undertone of turnip, probably one that had already started to rot. Still, your stomach clenches in thanks. Across the fire, someone is softly humming a song you recognise from the last harvest festival, the one before the rains came. It feels like a dream now, a hallucination, but you let it wrap around you just for a minute. Tomorrow you'll dig near the hedges for wild onions, maybe check on the mushroom rumour. But tonight, you'll sleep with a belly not quite empty, that's your victory. By morning, the broth has worn off, leaving you with a hollow tightness in your belly and the familiar fog behind your eyes. Hunger isn't sharp anymore, it's something else now. Something quieter, like a whisper you can't quite catch, but you're awake, so you move. The fire has gone out again, and the wind seeps in through the cracks between the daub and wattle. The air smells of cold earth, smoke, and the sour scent of old straw. There's a sliver of light through the eastern window, barely more than a hole stuffed with cloth, and it's enough to remind you today you have to find something to eat. In the corner, under the rickety wooden shelf, lies what you were saving. One small round of barley bread. It's dark, hard, and heavy enough to knock someone out. You cut it in half with your knife, the blade dull from years of sharpening on stone. The bread is coarse, gritty between your teeth. There's a strange tang to it. You added bits of bean flour and some wild seeds last time you baked. Not for flavour, for bulk. You chew slowly, you have to. Rushing would feel like betrayal. Barley is the workhorse grain of your world. Not prized like wheat, not as light or fine, but tough. It grows in poorer soils, braves the colder seasons, is peasant grain, honest and stubborn. In a good year, you'd mix it with oats and maybe a little lard, maybe honey if the bees were generous. In a famine year, it's mixed with desperation. Sometimes tree bark or ground up fava pods, sometimes chalk ground and sifted until it almost passes for flour. But your stomach doesn't care. Your body needs calories more than dignity. The last loaf you baked, weeks ago now, was stretched with ground pea husks and a handful of old bran you traded from the baker's widow. She had a cellar with some odd leftovers, probably from better times, and she offered you the bran in exchange for patching a broken stool leg. You're not a carpenter, not really, but you managed. That loaf fed you and your daughter for 4 days. This one, it's already half gone. Outside, the village smells like smoke and mud. That's all the world is now. Ash, damp earth, and the weight of silence. You walk past a neighbour's house. No fire burning inside. The door hangs open. You don't look too closely. You've seen enough already this week, too many rooms with no answers, just stillness. By the time you reach the centre of the village, a few others have gathered, all thin and hunched against the cold. There's talk of a new bread being passed around from house to house. More like a cake, someone says. Made with ground acorns. Someone else mutters that it causes belly cramps and madness. You've heard stories about people eating acorn bread, yes, but it takes work. The tannins are bitter and toxic unless you soak the nuts in water for days, changing it often. And who has that kind of time? That kind of patience? When you're hungry, the line between food and poison gets blurry real fast. Still, you'd eat it. You're sure of that now. One older woman near the village green is sharing slivers of her barley loaf. It's shaped like a flat disc, scored across the top in a crude X. She dips it in water before eating, helps soften the crust. You follow suit, breaking off a corner of your own remaining half loaf and wetting it in the trough. The water tastes like wood and metal, but it helps. You don't speak while eating. No one does. Hunger is like a prayer now, private, solemn, and ever-present. There's an old superstition someone mentions as you sit there. A bit of fringe lore passed down from her grandmother. Never eat the last bite of a famine loaf. She says it's cursed, that whoever finishes it first will be the first to die. You raise your eyebrows but don't say anything. Not because you believe her exactly. but because belief feels safer than doubt right now. A boy nearby, not more than 10, tears into his own bread with alarming urgency. His hands tremble. You can see flecks of dirt under his nails and a crust of something on his sleeve. His mother watches him with tired eyes and the quiet guilt that only parents of famine children understand. You've felt it yourself. You'll feel it again. In the background, the church bell rings, one long tone. It doesn't mean mass, it means a burial. No one rushes. There's no strength for rushing. But everyone knows who it was. An old man, probably. Or someone younger who just gave up. It happens, more now than ever. The historical record tells us that during true famine years, bread lost its shape entirely. Sometimes it wasn't even baked. People ate paste, grains mashed into water and left in the sun. No yeast, no leavening, no rise. The symbolism of bread, life, communion, the body of Christ shattered by need. In towns, people would queue for scraps tossed out behind bakeries. In the countryside, you were the bakery, and your oven was a pit lined with stone and hope. What's interesting is the open debate among scholars over how widespread these coping strategies were. Some believe that famine recipes, like barley loaf stretched with pea flour, were known and shared across communities, passed down like treasured secrets. Others argue that most peasants simply improvised, that survival came down to what you had, who you knew, and how desperate you were. There's probably truth in both. You've learned more from your neighbours in the past 2 months than you ever did during all those carefree harvest festivals. Later in the day, you spot a figure hobbling along the edge of the fields. He's carrying something wrapped in a cloth. Word spreads quickly. He's from the next village over and brought barley flour to trade. No one asks where he got it. No one wants to know. He asks for lard or smoked meat or a copper spoon. You offer the other half of your loaf and the promise of one clean wool mitten. He doesn't take it. Others offer better. You watch the flour disappear into someone else's hands, and just like that, your hope shrinks again. You spend the rest of the afternoon scavenging. Under the eaves of the barn, you find a clump of dried moss. Not edible. Under the hedge, a few wilted dandelions. You chew the stems, bitter, but they fool your mouth into thinking something's coming. Back at home, your daughter is curled up on the floor, sleeping more now than waking. You lie beside her, pull the thin blanket up to both chins, and listen to her shallow breaths. Tomorrow, maybe you'll try boiling bark again. The morning air hits your face like a slap from someone who doesn't care if you wake up or not. It's grey again. No sun, no seal, no snow, just that dull, endless cold that presses against your skin and seeps into your joints. You're getting used to it. You've stopped expecting warmth, just like you've stopped expecting full meals or sleep without dreams of food. The ground is hard and lumpy, littered with frozen footprints and chicken droppings from birds no one's seen for a week. Most were eaten, or wandered off, or just stopped laying and became too expensive to keep alive. You chew on a thought. Oats. You haven't had oats in weeks. It used to be your fallback when the bread ran out. Thick oat porridge with a pinch of salt, maybe some chopped leeks or wild garlic if you were feeling fancy. But now, even oats are scarce. You think you saw someone trading a whole iron nail for a bowl of oat gruel last week. 1 nail! That's how far the world has fallen. Still, oats are more forgiving than wheat or rye. They grow in rough soils and survive the frost better. And when they're around, they fill your belly in a way that sticks. You dream about them sometimes, in bowls the size of your head, steaming with honey, or goose fat melting on top. Those are good dreams, cruel but good. Today you're heading out toward the edge of the Manor-lands, where the peas and beans used to grow. It's late in the season for anything edible, but maybe you'll find a few dried pods still clinging to the plants, or drop between the furrows, missed by the gleaners. You bring your woven basket, though there's not much optimism in your grip. You reach the field by mid-morning. The earth is stiff, half frozen, but there are remnants. Dry vines like brittle fingers curling up from the ground. You crouch and start searching. It takes time. You're slower than you used to be. Your knees creak when you bend. Your fingers fumble in the cold and your thoughts are sluggish. Hunger slows everything except your heartbeat, which thuds loudly in your ears with every movement. Eventually you find a pod. One single wrinkled pea still inside. You stare at it like it's a coin or a pearl or a promise. You pop it in your mouth before you can think better of it, crunching it between your teeth. It tastes like dust and memory. Someone else is in the field too. An old man, hunched, moving slowly along the rows with a long stick. He nods to you without speaking. He's not competition. No one is, not really. You're all picking over the same bones. He motions toward a patch near the tree line. You follow, and he gestures to a patch of soil that's been disturbed. A few beans, small and hard, lie on the ground. You gather them carefully one by one, maybe enough to boil into something. Peas and beans are a gift in times like this. Legumes have always been the quiet heroes of the medieval table. They store well when dried, they're full of protein, and they grow in soil too poor for grain. In fact, they fix nitrogen back into the land, though you don't know it by that name. You just know they're good crops, and this year even their ghost is something to be grateful for. You bring your little haul back home, a small pile of beans, a few dry pea husks, and what looks like a bit of withered chickweed you pulled from near the hedgerow. Not much, but it means you can make something. Maybe a watery stew, maybe just a hot drink to keep your hands warm. Either way, it's a plan. Plans feel rare these days. You crush the beans with the heel of your hand on a flat stone, then boil them with some of the dried nettle you saved from autumn. It smells earthy. Not bad, not good. It smells like something that used to be food. When it's done, you ladle a bit into a chipped wooden bowl and give the first sip to your daughter. She barely wakes, just blinks and sips, her hands trembling as she tries to hold the bowl. She whispers thank you without looking up. You wonder how many more days she can last. Some of the older villagers still talk about other famine years, especially the hard one years back, when people ate their seed grain. That was a mistake. Without seed, there's no planting. No planting means no next year. You swore you wouldn't do that. You even hid a pouch of peas under the hearthstone months ago, but last week you dug it up and boiled it. That oath didn't last long. There's an odd scholarly debate about whether medieval peasants truly understood long-term planning or if they lived moment to moment. Modern historians often underestimate them, as if being poor meant being simple. But you know the truth. You knew exactly what eating those seed peas meant. You just also knew what not eating them would mean. By evening, word spreads, the steward is coming tomorrow, supposedly with news, possibly with bread, possibly with punishments for those behind on rent. It's hard to know which would be worse. You tidy the house as best you can, sweeping the cold dirt floor, folding the ragged blankets, stacking the broken dishes like they matter. Presentation counts, even now, especially now. You sit by the fire that night and stare into the embers. They glow like coals from a world that still worked. You remember when food was food, when meals had texture and colour and didn't feel like begging. You think about the first time your daughter tried boiled peas years ago. She called them green candy. You laughed. You both laughed. Tonight there's no laughter. Just the scrape of your spoon in the bottom of the bowl, the ticking of wood cooling in the fire, and the wind pressing softly against the wall. You go to bed with the taste of beans still on your tongue. You wake to a smell that isn't yours. It takes a moment to place smoke, sure, but different. There's a sharpness to it, there's a green edge, like something fresh burning. You rise slowly, careful not to wake your daughter, and creep to the doorway. Across the village, someone has lit a cooking fire outside, and in the pot, though you can't see it, you can smell it. They're boiling something wild, not grain, not meat, greens, maybe nettles, maybe worse. You tighten your shawl around your shoulders and make your way over, pretending it's casual, like you're just out for a walk. But nobody's fooled anymore. Everyone knows when you're hungry. It's a smell you wear on your breath, a slump in your spine. The woman at the fire nods but doesn't speak. She's got a bundle of leaves in one hand, dumping them into the pot in careful handfuls. Her son is beside her, thin arms wrapped around his knees. His eyes flick toward you, wary and tired. "What is it?" you ask softly. You don't want to startle them. Nobody shares if they feel threatened. "Dock leaves, some sorrel, bitter nettle," she says, not looking at you. "Found some ground elder, too." You nod like you know exactly what she's talking about. You do, mostly. You've picked nettles before, even if you curse them afterward. The sting goes away with boiling, or so they say. Sorrel has that lemony bite if you get the right kind, though too much makes your tongue tingle. And dock, well, it fills space in your belly. That's all it needs to do. They're making pottage, or at least their version of it. No barley, no salt, no meat, just water and whatever green thing they could pull from the soil without getting caught. You ask if they need help watching the fire. She shakes her head, but her eyes say yes. You sit nearby anyway, offering your silence as currency. This scraping together of weeds and water has become the new normal. Everyone's foraging, not just in the woods and along the hedges, but in the very edges of memory. You remember things your grandmother said once, offhand comments about goosefoot and fat hen, plants that seemed like fairy tale names at the time. Now they're lifelines, You think about the list of edible wild greens you've been building in your mind. Nettles, chickweed, cleavers, dandelion, mallow, shepherd's purse. Most taste bitter or grassy or just plain awful, but they don't kill you. And some, like sorrel, almost feel like food. Almost. There's a weird sort of satisfaction that comes with identifying something growing wild and turning it into a meal. It's not pleasure, exactly. More like defiance. A way of saying you haven't beaten me yet. Even as your ribs start to show and your hair falls out in clumps, you're still here, still chewing. You remember an old tale one of the grandmothers used to tell, how during a famine in her youth, people boiled up thistles and even hay. They'd strain it, chew the fibrous bits, spit out what couldn't be swallowed. Someone tried moss once, didn't go well. Another boiled leather, real leather, from an old shoe. You wonder if that's where you're heading, maybe not this week, but soon. There's a scholarly debate about the role of weeds in the medieval diet. Some argue that these plants weren't just famine food, but a part of normal seasonal eating, especially in early spring, what some call the hungry gap. Others think that's romanticising the past. They say weeds only entered the pot when all else failed, and even then, reluctantly. Your experience tells you it's a little of both. You never would have touched nettles 2 years ago. Now you look at them like they owe you something. The woman stirs the pot with a stick. Her hands are calloused and red, knuckles swollen from cold and work. You offer to trade for a scoop, half a bit of linen you tore from your apron, still mostly clean. She nods, then hands you a scoop in a cracked bowl. The greens float in the cloudy water like seaweed in a dying tide pool. You sip. It's sharp, bitter, but warm. You don't hesitate. Back home, you begin planning your own version. You know where some sorrel grows by the old path, under the shadow of a crumbling stone wall. Nettles along the fence, if you can pick them without getting stung too badly. Maybe even some wood sorrel by the church, though it's often picked over. You wrap your hands in cloth and head out, basket over your arm. The landscape has changed, not the earth, but how you see it. Every patch of green is a possibility. Every leaf becomes a question, edible, poisonous, useful. You move like a deer, grazing cautiously, alert to both danger and dinner. You avoid the Lord's lands, where foraging could get you whipped or worse. Stay to the commons, the in-between places, the forgotten edges. That's where survival hides. You gather slowly, hands numb. Sorrel, check. Nettles, check. Some dandelion, flowers and leaves. You even find a few garlic mustard plants, their spindly stalks rising defiantly between 2 fence posts. You pluck them with care and head home, triumphant in your own quiet, starving way. Back in your cottage, you build a small fire with twigs and dried dung. The smoke burns your eyes, but it keeps the pot warm. You boil the greens with a bit of water and a cracked piece of turnip you saved from days ago. No salt, of course. Salt costs more than meat now, but the mix steams gently, and when it's ready you split it between yourself and your daughter. She grimaces at the bitterness, but eats it all the same. You sip slowly, telling her, it's spring soup, like it's a treat. She doesn't laugh, but her eyes soften. That's enough. Outside, the bell rings again. Another funeral. No one looks surprised. You lie down that night with your stomach not full, but not clawing either. It's a victory, however small. You think about all the greens you passed by, plants you didn't recognise. Tomorrow you'll ask around. Maybe someone else knows. Maybe some of the old women remember what their mothers told them. The knowledge of the poor is rarely written down, but it lives in the hands, in the taste buds, in the strange patchwork of memory and desperation. For tonight, you sleep with the scent of nettle still on your fingers and the faint warmth of sorrel in your belly. You dreamed of roast goose last night. Tonight you won't. Your body knows better now. You wake up hungry again, of course. It's a dull ache now, a background hum in your body, like a low drumbeat echoing beneath your ribs. But something else nudges at your senses this morning. Wood smoke, yes. But underneath that, something sweet and strange. You blink, sit up, and sniff the air like a hound. It's faint, but it's there. Nuts. Roasted, maybe not, but raw, earthy, oily. It's the smell of something wild and possibly edible. Something from the forest. You wrap your shawl around your shoulders and nudge your daughter awake. She stirs, her lips cracked and pale, and you whisper that you're going to the woods. You tell her to stay inside, stay warm, and you promise to bring back something. Anything. The forest has always been both a gift and a gamble. The Lord technically owns the woods like he owns the fields, the animals, the air you breathe. But he's not here today. Or if he is, he's warm in his hall eating salted venison while you slip through the brambles with your hands held low and your eyes sharp. You know the path well enough. It's where you used to gather firewood in better years. Now you scan the ground for anything that might pass for food. And there they are, acorns, scattered beneath the gnarled arms of an ancient oak, half buried in damp raw leaves, some cracked, some whole. Your heart actually skips. You drop to your knees and start collecting them, dirt under your nails, fingers moving faster than your thoughts. You fill your basket with as many as you can find, ignoring the sting of cold and the creeping feeling that someone might be watching. Acorns aren't new to you. You've heard the old stories, the whispered recipes. Your grandmother once made hunger bread with acorn flour during a lean summer, long before you were born. She boiled them, soaked them, ground them down into a bitter, brown paste, then mixed that with a handful of rye and baked it into something flat and sharp. She said it gave her headaches but kept her walking. They're not top food, not really, not in the way bread or beans are. Acorns have to be leached, sometimes for days in cold water to strip out the tannins that will turn your stomach inside out. But you don't have days. You have hours, maybe less. So you do the fastest version you know. Crush them with a stone on a flat board near the hearth, then pour boiling water over them. It's not perfect. It probably won't be a nut, but it's something. As you work, your daughter watches. She's fascinated. She asks if this is what squirrels eat. You smile and nod. And clever girls, you say. Quick. She grins, just barely, and it makes your chest hurt in a way hunger never could. You toast the mashed acorns on a flat pan over the coals just until they're dry and dark. They smell smoky, almost nutty, but with a bitterness underneath. You mix the mash with a little of the last oat flour you'd been hoarding, just a tablespoon's worth. The resulting dough is thick and gritty. You flatten it into cakes and press them to the hot stone by the fire. They don't rise. Of course not. There's nothing left in them to rise with. But they solidify, and that's what matters. You peel them off the stone when they're firm enough to hold together, and you break off a piece for your daughter. She nibbles it cautiously, chews, and then makes a face. It's weird, she says. You laugh. That means it's working. You eat slowly. It tastes like ash and dirt and something old, not rotten, just ancient. Like the forest itself is sharing some secret you weren't meant to know. It dries your mouth, but it puts something in your belly. That's enough. Later you try roasting a few chestnuts you found among the leaves. They're wormy, but some of them are salvageable. You roast them on the same hot stone, cracking them open one by one. One is mouldy, you toss it. Another is firm, slightly sweet, and you savour it like it's the last plum of summer. There's a strange elegance to these foods, forest foods, the kinds of things the rich never touch unless a chef's touched them first. Acorns and chestnuts have fed animals for centuries, but now they're feeding you. Not well, not safely, but enough to stretch one more day. In some regions, especially across southern Europe, chestnuts were a staple for the poor during hard years. They grew in abundance and were easier to prepare than acorns. In Italy and France, some mountain villages even baked chestnut bread regularly, sweet, dense, and nourishing. Scholars argue about whether those traditions spread northward or remained isolated. You don't care, you just know that if you find another worm-free nut tomorrow, you'll call it a miracle. But there's also risk. Not all nuts are friendly. You've heard stories of children poisoned by horse chestnuts, of families made sick from misidentified mushrooms and spoiled bark flour. One wrong bite and your suffering doesn't stretch, it ends. Quietly, maybe painfully, with no one left to tell your story. Still, you'll go back tomorrow. You know the trees now. You'll try leaching the acorns longer, see if the bitterness fades. You'll test roasting them in the coals, baking them into thinner cakes. Maybe mix them with chopped greens or bits of dried root. You're not a cook anymore. You're a kind of alchemist, working with scraps, hoping for gold. Before sleep, your daughter holds up the last piece of her acorn cake and asks if you'll make more tomorrow. You nod. You tell her you'll find more nuts. She says, "Make it less weird next time." You laugh into your sleeve. That night you sit by the fire long after she falls asleep, turning a chestnut over and over in your hand like it's a jewel. The wind howls outside. Somewhere far away wolves are crying, or maybe dogs. Or maybe people. You press the chestnut into your palm and close your fingers around it. Tomorrow, you'll go again. The morning fog hangs low and thick, curling around the roofs of the cottages like smoke from a dying fire. You can barely see a few feet ahead as you step out of the doorway, the door creaking on its leather hinge. The sky is a dull, featureless sheet of grey. No sun, no shadow, just an oppressive stillness that makes the world feel like it's been packed in wool. You can hear your daughter's breath behind you, faint and wheezy as she huddles in the blanket near the hearth. You left her the last piece of chestnut cake. You told her it was special, she believed you. Today you're thinking soup or something that could pretend to be soup if you squint hard enough and don't breathe through your nose. You gather a few pieces of dry wood, mostly twigs and splinters from the edge of the forest, and get the fire going. It takes longer now, the wood is damp, and you're clumsy from sleep and starvation. Still, the embers catch, and soon enough you have a weak, sputtering flame. You fill the pot with water from the rain barrel. There's a thin sheen of algae floating onto top, so you strain it through a bit of cloth. You're not picky anymore. As long as it doesn't move or smell like death, it's fair game. Into the pot goes a handful of dried dandelion leaves, a pinch of that old turnip you keep rehydrating over and over, and a bit of crushed acorn flour. It's thick, brown, and unappetizing. But it'll stretch the liquid into something more like food. What you're making is closer to gruel than soup, or maybe a pottage, if you were being generous. Is a dish that's existed for centuries. Boiled grains, roots and vegetables, all simmered into a single slop that you can sip or scoop. When made well, it can be comforting. When made like this, well, it's warm. That's about all it has going for it. In better years, your pottage might have included barley or oats, thick chunks of carrot, maybe bits of onion or cabbage. A scrap of meat, if a chicken had died recently. Even a few herbs for flavour. Parsley, sage, maybe a little garlic if the harvest had been kind. But now it's just water and things pretending to be food. The only herb you have left is dried nettle, and you've already used most of that. Your daughter stirs as the smell reaches her, and she calls out, "Is it ready?" You say, "Almost," and it's the truth, though part of you wants to keep boiling it down into something smaller, something more precious. But hunger doesn't wait. You ladle out 2 small bowls and hand one to her. She cradles it like a treasure, blowing gently on the steam before taking a sip. Her face doesn't change. That's a good sign, you think. Or maybe she's just too tired to complain. You eat slowly, watching the fire dance across the bottom of the pot. The taste is bitter, and the texture is somewhere between mud and mashed moss. But it's warm, and it stays down. That's the new gold standard. If it doesn't make you sick, it's a success. There's a strange kind of ritual to eating gruel. You sit quietly, holding the bowl in both hands, hunched over like it might escape if you're not careful. You sip, and you breathe. You feel the heat spread through your chest, down into your stomach, dulling the edge of the hunger. Not curing it, never that, but softening it, the way snow quiets footsteps. You don't talk, you don't even think, you just exist, bowl in hand, moment to moment. Later in the day, you try foraging again. Less for food this time, more for anything that might give the soup some texture. You find a few dried up roots, a wild carrot that's more woody core than flesh, and something that might be parsnip or might be just a weed trying too hard. You dig it up anyway. On your way back, you pass the mill. The big wheel isn't turning today, no grain means no grinding, and the miller's son sits on the porch with a hollow-eyed look, his hands folded in his lap like he's trying to remember what they're supposed to do. You nod at him, he nods back. Nobody says anything. At the edge of the path you find something unexpected, a dead bird, blackbird maybe, or a starling. Hard to tell, its neck is broken, and it's stiff with cold. You hesitate. You've heard stories of people getting sick from bad meat. But it doesn't smell, and there's no obvious rot. You wrap it in a cloth and tuck it into your basket. Back home, you pluck it over the fire. It's not much, barely enough meat to cover your thumb, but it gives the broth a flavour it hasn't had in weeks. You boil the bones too until they soften and cloud the water with whatever essence they hold. The resulting stew is thinner than blood, but richer than anything you've had in days. Your daughter says, "It tastes like meat." You tell her it is meat. She doesn't ask what kind. You don't volunteer the answer. There's an old superstition about eating thin soups during famine. Some say it lets the soul slip out through your breath. Others say the steam carries your prayers higher. You don't believe either, but you like the idea that something in your hunger might be noticed. By God, or fate, or just the wind. Historically, gruel and pottage were the baseline meals for peasants. In good years they sustained life. In bad years they mocked it. There's some debate among historians about whether medieval people considered these meals comforting or humiliating. Was it resilience or just resignation? Scholars argue you don't. You know what it is, necessary. Before bed, you check the pot again. There's still a bit of stew left thickening as it cools. You cover it with a cloth. It might be breakfast. It might be nothing by morning if someone hungrier breaks in. You wedge the door shut with a stone and lie down beside your daughter. She whispers, "Do we have to eat that again tomorrow?" You say, "Only if we're lucky." She laughs. "Just a little. Just enough." You close your eyes and pretend you're full. The morning arrives with no warning, no rooster, no sunbeam, just the dull ache of being alive again. Your bones feel heavier than usual. Your joints stiff from the cold and that odd sleeping position you fell into while curled around your daughter. She's still breathing, still here, and that's more than you expected to wake up to. Outside, the village stirs slowly. Fires are being lit. Not out of comfort, but necessity. Warmth is expensive now. Everything is. Even time. You stretch, rub your eyes, and reach for the cloth covering the pot near the hearth. The pottage has congealed into a thick paste, greyish-brown and sticky. Still edible, technically. You scoop it out with a wooden spoon and scrape it into a bowl for your daughter. She blinks awake and takes it without a word. No questions anymore, just eating and waiting. You're thinking about liquid calories today. Water isn't enough. The food is so thin, so sparse, that you need something more filling to drink. Something heavier than soup. And there's only one thing left in the village that might meet that description. Ale. Or at least what's become of ale. People think of ale now as something you drink for pleasure, to celebrate or unwind. But in your world, ale is survival. Liquid bread. In times of famine, when flour is scarce and ovens grow cold, ale often outlasts everything else. It's easier to digest than raw grain. It's boiled, which makes it safer than most water, and it contains calories, even if it's just the weak, sour stuff you're most likely to get your hands on. The ale you drink isn't the frothy golden beverage of taverns and festivals. What you're after is small ale, barely fermented, cloudy, flat and sour. It's brewed with the leftovers, spent grains, crusts, old malt, even barley that was deemed unfit for bread. It's thin and earthy, often only just alcoholic. But it gives you something, and that something might just be enough. You make your way to the edge of the village, where old Marta still keeps her brewing pit. In better times, she was known for her warming ale, rich and malty, served in jugs wrapped in cloth. Now, her setup is a few battered barrels, a copper pot and a stack of damp straw. She's stirring something with a wooden paddle as you approach, her face drawn and red from steam. She sees you and raises an eyebrow. Looking to trade? You nod and offer her the last of your nettle leaves and a bit of that crushed acorn flour you saved in a twist of cloth. She eyes it, shrugs, and ladles a scoop of ale into a jug. It's lukewarm and smells like sour bread left out in the rain. You take it gratefully. "Drink it fast," she says. "It won't keep." You nod again. "Thank you." The ale goes down rough, thick and sour, but with a faint sweetness underneath, like something once alive. You bring it home, and your daughter wrinkles her nose at it, but drinks too. Afterward, her cheeks flush slightly, a bit of colour that almost makes her look healthy again. You wonder how many people are living off small ale now. Probably most of them. It's not just a drink, it's become breakfast, lunch and dinner. You know the monks at the nearby abbey brew their own, and rumour has it theirs is stronger, richer, more nourishing. But that's for the sick and the dying, the truly desperate. You're only moderately desperate. Or maybe you're just too proud to ask. Historically, small ale was a staple for peasants during lean times. Not because it got you drunk, though sometimes it did if you brewed it wrong, but because it gave you just enough calories to keep going. It was safer than water, easier than bread, and cheaper than anything else. Some households brewed it daily, reusing the same mash several times until all the life was leached out. You've heard of people brewing with herbs like horehound or mugwort to stretch the flavour. You wonder if Marta's done the same. There's a debate among historians over just how much ale peasants consumed. Some say it was constant, every meal, every day. Others argue that clean water sources made ale more of a luxury than a necessity. You know the truth sits somewhere in between. When water makes you sick and food is vanishing, ale becomes more than a drink. It becomes hope in a cup. Later in the day you try brewing your own. Not real ale, not in the proper way, but something close. You take a handful of cracked barley you found buried in the corner of the grain bin, almost mouldy but not quite, and soak it in warm water near the fire. You stir it, let it sit, then pour off the liquid into a cup. It's more like barley tea than beer. But it's warm and it's cloudy and your daughter doesn't spit it out. That's a win. You imagine yourself as a brewer now. Not the kind with tools and casks, but the kind who does what she must. You might try fermenting tomorrow. You know someone who has a bit of old yeast scrap. Or maybe a piece of sour bread you can soak. If it turns out, you'll share. Or maybe you won't. Maybe you'll hoard it like gold and sip it one drop at a time. You sit by the fire with the last of Marta's ale in your cup. It's gone flat. It wasn't very fizzy to begin with, but it's warm in your belly, and you can almost imagine the feeling of fullness. Not quite, but close enough to pretend. Your daughter leans against your side, her head heavy on your arm. She asks, "Will we have more tomorrow?" You say, "Yes," because what else can you say? She says, "It tasted like bread." You smile and nod, trying not to think about how long it's been since either of you had actual bread. Before sleep, you wrap the brewing pot in cloth to keep it warm. You whisper a little prayer over it. Not a grand one, not even proper Latin. Just something simple. Let this work. Let this become something more than water. Let this keep us one more day. Tomorrow you'll try again. You dream of bread again. This time it's warm, golden, crusty, torn open with your hands and steaming in the cold air. You can almost taste it, sour, chewy, soft inside with that perfect crunch on the edges. There's butter too, rich and melting. Your daughter is laughing beside you, crumbs on her cheeks. She reaches for more. Then the crust darkens, the inside turns grey, and suddenly the loaf is alive, breathing, pulsing. You wake up choking, the fire's out. Of course it is. The coals have gone cold and outside dawn is barely pressing at the horizon. You lie there for a moment, soaked in sweat despite the chill, the taste of that dream bread still lingering like a cruel joke. But even that phantom comfort is better than what you're about to face today. You have to talk about the mould, because it's not just hunger that kills during famine, it's what hunger makes you ignore, what hunger makes you eat. The grain that's left in the village, what little hasn't been traded, stolen or hoarded, is changing. It looks the same from a distance, but up close it has that telltale shimmer, that strange purple-black tint crawling across the kernels. It's rye mostly. Rye grows in places wheat won't, cold, poor soils, the kind you've got plenty of, but it's cursed too. Under the wrong conditions, especially after damp seasons, it carries something inside it, a sickness, a fungus, a gut. You didn't know what it was the first time someone said the bread made them sick. Old Gert said her legs were burning like fire under her skin. A boy said his hands were full of pins. Then the stories started. People seeing visions, people laughing uncontrollably, people twisting in their sleep and waking up screaming. A girl in the next village tore out her own hair and said, angels were speaking to her through the chimney. You didn't believe it, at first, but then you ate a bit of that dark rye loaf your cousin gave you. It was stale and tasted off, but you were starving. 2 hours later, the world tilted. The trees outside looked like they were breathing. Your fingertips felt too large for your hands. You cried for no reason. Your daughter kept asking you questions you couldn't answer because your mind had gone somewhere else. Ergotism, they call it now. Historians debate whether it was common or rare. Some argue that outbreaks were isolated, local and unlucky. Others say it was a regular visitor in times like this, hiding in every granary too damp, every breadloaf too dark. You don't need a scholar to tell you what it does. You've seen it firsthand. You've felt it in your own bones. There are two types, apparently. The convulsive kind with fits and spasms, hallucinations and hysteria, and the gangrenous kind where your fingers turn black and fall off. You don't know which is worse, you just know that when the bread starts to smell sweet but wrong, like honey left out in the rain, you should throw it out. But no one does. No one can afford to. This morning you find a small heel of rye bread near the hearth. It's from a trade you made 3 days ago. Just a sliver wrapped in cloth. You were saving it. Now you unwrap it slowly, inspecting it under the grey light. It looks okay. There's no fuzz, no purple, no shine. But your stomach growls loud enough to make the floor creak, and suddenly you realise it doesn't matter. You break it in half, give the larger piece to your daughter, and chew the rest with your eyes closed. It tastes metallic. Or maybe that's just your imagination. You try to push the thought away. Later you go to check on your neighbour, a weaver named Thomas. He hasn't been outside in days, and when you knock on his door there's no answer. You push it open and find him curled up in a corner, eyes wide and unfocused. He's muttering something, nonsense syllables, that almost sound like a song. There's an untouched loaf on the floor beside him. Dark rye, streaked with purple. You leave it there. Back home, you drink some weak barley tea to wash the taste from your mouth. You feel lightheaded, not like before, not fully, but enough that your legs feel a little too soft beneath you. You sit by the fire and focus on your hands. Watch them. Count your fingers. Move each one. They still work. Good. Your daughter is drawing shapes in the ash on the hearthstone. She hums quietly some tune you don't recognize. You ask her how she feels. She says she's cold but not hungry. That scares you more than if she'd said the opposite. There's an eerie calm that settles over the village during famine. Not silence exactly, people still move, still breathe, but it's as if everyone is walking through fog or underwater. You make eye contact with a woman you've known for years, and neither of you speaks. There's no point. Words have become too heavy to carry, and hanging above it all is that quiet dread. How do you know when the food becomes the enemy? Even now, as you write mental notes about what you can safely eat, the mould lingers in your thoughts. You begin inspecting everything more closely. Acorns, grains, old loaves, and second-guessing every bite. Was that a bitter aftertaste or just imagination? Was the dizziness from hunger or something darker? You remember an old rhyme, something the village children used to chant when skipping rope. Black bread, red hands, don't eat it if it stands. White bread, sweet head, eat it cold or you'll be dead. It never made much sense until now. That night, as you lie beside your daughter, you whisper stories to her, soft ones, harmless ones, tales of kitchens full of pies and cellars full of apples. You talk about a loaf so big you had to carry it on your back and a butter pat the size of your hand. She laughs, just once, a dry giggle like wind through straw. You don't tell her the truth, that her fingers looked pale and blue this morning, or that you felt a tremor in your thigh that wouldn't stop for half an hour. You just keep telling stories. You make up a new one about a brave girl who found a hidden bakery in the forest and made bread from tree bark that tasted like honey. When you finally drift off, you dream again of bread. But this time, it's black, and it's watching you. By the next morning, you're craving something other than bread, or what passes for bread these days. Your stomach has grown suspicious of loaves, of porridge, of anything grain-based. You've started imagining flavours that don't belong to anything you've eaten in months. Roasted fish, fried onions, fresh cream on cold apples. It's not helpful, but it keeps your mind occupied when your body is too weak to move. Your daughter mumbles something about soup in her sleep. She dreams in meals now. You sit up slowly and feel the sway in your limbs. That half slice of possibly cursed rye bread still churns in your belly. You can't be sure whether it's hunger or poison anymore. Probably both. You need protein, real protein. Something clean, something not moulded or gnawed on or scraped off a rock. Something pulled from the earth or water that still knows how to nourish. Fish. It hits you all at once. Of course, the stream's nearby, the pond beyond the trees, the river even further still. The village has always had fish, at least in theory. The Lord's men used to fish it and claim every trout as property. But in times like these, even those rules get blurry. You wrap your shawl around you, pick up your daughter's old wooden bucket, and head toward the pond. The mist clings low to the ground, curling around your ankles like smoke. It's quiet. Too quiet. Even the birds are absent today. Maybe flown south, maybe eaten. You can't blame them either way. The pond is half frozen at the edges. Thin sheets of glass crackle underfoot as you step carefully onto the bank. The water's dark and still, with a few reeds poking out like skeleton fingers. You crouch down and watch. Nothing moves, no ripples, no darting shapes, no signs of life. But there must be something. You break the ice with a rock and dip your hand into the water. It's so cold it stings your bones. You last 3 seconds before yanking it out, gasping. But even in that brief moment, you think you felt something brush your fingers. Maybe a fish. Maybe just hope. You don't have a line or bait, or even a hook. But you do have an old basket and a bit of cloth. You fashion a crude trap just like the old woman taught you years ago during a summer you barely remember. You weigh it down with stones, tie it to a stick and lower it into the shallow edge of the pond. Then you wait. Historically, fish were one of the great equalizers during a famine year. They were the protein of the poor when you could get them. In fact, many fast days, which happened often, sometimes over 100 a year, required fish instead of meat. That meant fish was already embedded in the food culture of the time, but when famine came, those fast day rules turned into survival rules, and suddenly everyone wanted herring. In towns, salted fish became currency. In the countryside, it became legend. There are stories of peasants trading an entire winter's firewood for a single smoked eel. Children were sent to sleep with bits of fish bone under their pillows as charms. Some thought fish would appear if you sang the right song to the water. You try humming one now, some tune your mother used to sing, more lullaby than charm. 2 hours pass, your fingers are numb, your knees ache. But when you pull the trap up, something glimmers inside. A fish. Small, pale, terrified. You let out a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. It's barely longer than your hand, but it's meat. Real meat. You cradle it in both palms like a newborn. It flips once, then stills. You build a fire near the bank, shielding it with stones to keep the wind out. You scale the fish with your fingernails, gut it with a sieve of sharpened bone, and slide it onto a thin green stick. You roast it slowly, turning it until the skin crisps. The smell alone makes your eyes water. Back at home, your daughter sits up the moment she hears the door creak open. She sees the fish and her face changes. She doesn't smile. No one smiles easily anymore. But her eyes brighten. That's all you need. You split the fish in half. She takes the head without complaint. You chew slowly, savouring every bite. The skin is smoky, a little oily. The flesh is soft and flakes apart. There's no salt, no herbs, nothing fancy. But it tastes real. Your stomach doesn't argue. It thanks you. That night you dream of rivers, not just fish, but streams full of them. So full you could pluck them out with your bare hands. Your daughter dances along the banks, laughing. You follow, arms full of trout and eels and fat silver perch. In the dream no one is hungry. The next day you return to the pond. The basket is empty this time. The next day too. But on the third, another fish, a little smaller but still enough. You learn to make broth from the bones. You save the skin and roast it crisp, turning it into a treat. You stretch each fish into 2 meals. It isn't enough, but it's something. You start wondering about the river. It's a long walk, and the journey is dangerous. There are rumours of bands of starving men on the roads, desperate and wild. But the river runs deep and wide. If you could reach it, maybe you could catch something bigger, or smoke what you find and trade it. Maybe even feed someone else. You begin to plan, quietly, cautiously. You boil the fish bones again. You save the ashes of your fires. You wash the bucket. You clean your hands with melted snow. There's a strange energy in you now, not hope, not yet, but something flickering under the skin. Fish do that. They remind you that not everything has rotted or vanished, that beneath the ice life still moves. Your daughter touches your sleeve as you pack your things for tomorrow. Will there be more fish? You smile. If we're lucky. She nods and curls up beside the fire. Tomorrow you'll walk farther. Try the stream past the abbey. Maybe even ask the monks for a scrap of net or a hook. Maybe they'll turn you away, maybe not. But the fish is real, and so are you. You don't want to talk about it. Not really, but there's no avoiding it forever, is there? The truth is, the longer the famine goes on, the more creative people get. And not in a charming, look at this clever recipe kind of way. No, it's the kind of creativity that grows in the cracks of desperation, where logic gives out and instinct takes over. It's not cooking anymore. It's not even foraging. It's just surviving, no matter how low you have to go to do it. This morning, you heard whispers. 2 women talking near the well, low voices and quick glances. You know that tone. You've used it. It's how people talk about the unthinkable before they do it. One of them was holding something wrapped in cloth. You didn't ask. You didn't want to know what was inside. You've already seen it happen a few times. A loaf stretched with something that wasn't flour. Bread that doesn't rise, doesn't taste like anything, and burns into ash instead of crust. It looks like bread, smells like bread until you bite it. Bark, straw, dirt. Some people are grinding up straw from thatch roofs, pounding it into powder, mixing it with water and acorn paste and calling it dough. Others have tried bark, inner bark, peeled from trees, dried, and scraped fine. If it's young and clean, you might just get away with it. But more often than not, it tastes like rot and sits in your stomach like a stone. You've heard of people adding clay. Not because it's nourishing, it isn't, but because it bulks the food, fools the mouth, tricks the belly for a little while. You even tried it once, weeks ago, with a small scoop of riverbank clay and some barley water. It tasted like wet coins and left your teeth gritty. But your daughter didn't vomit and you didn't faint that day, so you counted it as a win. Today, you're making bread again. You can't call it bread, really. It's more like a paste you're shaping into discs and cooking on the hearthstone. You mash together crushed acorns, boiled sorrel, a few leftover nettle stems, and the last of the acorn flour that's gone slightly sour. The smell isn't great. It's damp and earthy with a hint of rot, You pretend it's cheese. You spread the dough thin, trying to trick it into crisping instead of steaming. The fire is too low to brown it, so you get a sort of damp cracker. Your daughter nibbles one edge, then pulls a face and puts it down. You don't blame her. You chew yours in silence. Later, you take a walk toward the mill. Not because there's grain, you already know there isn't, but because sometimes people gather there to share whatever sad trick they've discovered to make food out of nothing. And today, someone's got a loaf they're cutting into slices thinner than paper. It's pale, dense, slightly green at the edges. You trade a scrap of boiled root for a piece. You taste it carefully. Sawdust, definitely sawdust. It's mixed with bean husks, maybe, or ground peas, but the bulk of it is wood. You chew slowly, praying it doesn't splinter, praying it goes down and stays down. It does, barely. No one says anything, no one makes eye contact, and there's an unspoken rule now: don't ask what's in the food. If it's warm and it stays in your stomach, it's enough. Dignity is a luxury, names are a luxury, even recipes are gone. All that remains is the question, will this kill me? You remember a man last week who bragged about making bread from lichen and dried moss. He said he'd discovered a secret. 2 days later, he was foaming at the mouth, seized by tremors. Some mosses are edible, some are absolutely not. He picked the wrong kind. Historians call this famine food, a bland term, almost clinical, but you know better. It's not food. It's fuel, just enough to keep the engine running until something better appears, or until you stop needing it. There's still debate among scholars about just how far people went during medieval famines. Some believe these desperate loaves were rare exceptions. Others argue they were the rule, that for months or even years, entire communities lived off substitutes and poisons, chewing grass and scraping mould from rotten cheese. You tend to believe the second group. You're living it. Back home, you try another batch, this time with some bark you scrape from a birch tree near the edge of the woods. Birch is supposed to be safer, sweeter even, if you get the inner layer. You boil it until soft, mash it with a rock, and add it to the flour scraps you've been saving in a linen pouch. The dough comes together like glue, sticky and fibrous. You cook it flat and slow, the steam rising into your face as you lean over the fire. When it's done, you break it into pieces and hand half to your daughter. She hesitates, then takes a bite, then swallows. You wait. No vomiting, no tears. It's better than the fish skin, she says. You almost laugh. You eat your half slowly, chewing until your jaw aches. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just edible. That's the goal now. You keep a list in your mind: edible, possibly edible, lethal. Every time you find something new, you test it like a potion. Taste, wait, survive, repeat. That night you boil water with some nettle ash and bark scrapings and drink it like tea. It tastes like earth and tree sap, but it fills the silence between your ribs. Your daughter asks if tomorrow's bread will be made of actual things. You tell her, yes, you're lying. But lying is edible too in its own way. You dream of a bakery, again, loaves lined up like sleeping children. But when you bite into one, it's filled with mud and hair. You wake before dawn, the fire is out, again. You don't expect to feel envy anymore. Not this far into the famine. It's been scrubbed out of you, boiled away like everything else until all that's left is need. But today, when the steward rides through the village with 2 pack horses and a cart trailing behind him, the feelings return, sharp, hot and bitter. The horses are fed, their ribs don't show. One of them has a soft leather saddle with clean stitching. The steward himself is wearing a fur-lined cloak, dusted but dry. You haven't seen fur in months. More importantly, you smell something. Bread, real bread, wheat, not barley, leavened and crusted, aromatic. The kind of bread that actually has a shape to it. Round and heavy, not flat and cracking. There are only a few loaves, and they're not for you. He's bringing them to the manor house, tucked safely behind its tall wooden fence where the nobility still eat daily and drink deeply. They're not untouched by the famine. No one is. But they have buffers, stores, access, wine instead of ditch water. Bread made from flour, not straw. You hear the steward speaking with the reeve, and though the wind carries most of the words away, a few phrases reach your ears. Collected tithe, barely enough, they still owe more. Then he nods toward the church and mutters something about charity, the kind that doesn't come without record keeping. You stand there in the lane, clutching your daughter's hand, and watch them unload the cart. There's salted meat too, cheese, apples, slightly shriveled but whole. You swallow hard, then look away. You don't want your child to see your expression. Back at your cottage, you heat yesterday's leftover broth. It's thickened into a sort of glue overnight, and when warmed, it takes on a texture somewhere between porridge and regret. Your daughter eats her portion in silence, scraping the bowl with a spoon made from hollowed horn. She asks if the people in the manor house ever get hungry. You shake your head. Not the same way, you say, not like us. You remember the feast days, years ago, when the Lord's table spilled over with food. Roasted hares, stewed lamb, fish with sauce so rich it left your lips greasy for days. They'd throw scraps to the dogs and leave bones behind that still had meat on them. You used to think it was wasteful. Now you think it was cruelty in disguise. That afternoon you see the difference even more clearly. Two of the manor's servants pass by your door, carrying a basket between them, laughing as they walk. Inside you glimpse what looks like a half-finished pie. Meat pie, actual meat. They don't even notice you watching. And yet, as the sun sets and the cold creeps back in, the steward surprises everyone. He returns to the village square with a single sack of barley and announces, as if reading from a script, that the Lord has seen your suffering and offers aid. It's not enough, not even close, but people still shuffle forward, hands open. You line up like the rest. When it's your turn, the steward eyes you, then your daughter, and tosses you a handful of grain, loose, right into your shawl. You thank him. He doesn't reply. He's already turned to the next poor soul. Back at home, you run your fingers through the barley. It's clean. Surprisingly so. You wonder if it was meant for horses. You grind a bit of it by hand using your flat stone and the edge of a roof tile. It's slow, tedious work, your palms go raw. But when you finally cook it into a gruel, it's decent. Not good, not filling, but familiar. It tastes like years ago. Like something you used to eat without thinking. Your daughter calls it almost real food. You both smile. Later, you hear rumours from the far end of the village. Someone's stolen bread from the manor kitchens. They say a boy snuck in, took 2 small loaves, and was caught hiding in the hay barn. The steward came back after dark, flanked by 2 men with clubs. There's no punishment yet, just threats. But everyone knows how these things go. Bread becomes evidence, hunger becomes a crime. The divide between you and the manor house grows sharper every day. You live off roots and bark and dreams. They live off storehouses and cellars and someone else's labour. It's always been that way, of course, but famine makes the lines bold. There's an old debate among scholars about just how generous the nobility were during famine years. Some records show charity, bread baked in monastery ovens, grain redistributed, alms given freely. But others suggest that the rich hoarded what they could, locking granaries and guarding orchards with armed men. You don't need a historian to tell you how it is. You can see it from your doorway. What's strange is that some of the manor folk don't look much better than you now. The servants are thinner. One of the maids came to the edge of the village last week and traded a silver brooch for a boiled fish. You watched it happen. She didn't even pretend it wasn't for her. Still, they have bread. You don't. Before sleep, you take a piece of the barley paste and press it into a flat cake. You dry it by the fire, slowly, turning it every few minutes. You're saving it for tomorrow. Not because it will be better later, but because having it there gives you something to look forward to. Your daughter asks what the people in the manor dream about. Probably not food, you say. She thinks for a second. That sounds boring. You agree. That night you dream of walking into the manor kitchen. You're dressed as a noblewoman. Everyone bows. You lift the lid off a silver tray and find straw, bark, acorns, the same food you always eat. You laugh and they all clap like it's the finest meal they've ever seen. You wake up smiling. Then you remember. And the smile fades. The fire is still going. For once. Winter doesn't arrive with a grand entrance. It seeps in, slow and mean, like a draft under the door that turns into a blizzard by morning. And this year it doesn't arrive on schedule. The seasons used to have some rhythm to them. You could feel the year turning in your bones. You used to mark the days by tasks, planting, weeding, harvesting, resting, but now the rhythm is gone. Time slips sideways. The days blend into each other like gruel too thin to hold its shape. No harvest came this year, and without it, winter isn't a change. It's just more of the same, only colder. You wake up to frost on the inside of the walls. The fire died sometime in the night, and your breath fogs in front of your face as you sit up. Your daughter is curled beside you, wrapped in your only blanket, her hands tucked under her armpits. Her lips are tinged blue again. You tuck the blanket tighter around her and rise, joints cracking like old hinges. Outside, the village looks half dead. No snow yet, but the ground is hard as stone and the sky's flat and colourless. There's no movement, no carts, no smoke from chimneys, no birdsong. Even the rats have grown thin. You haven't seen one in a week, and that's concerning. The rhythm of the year used to anchor you. In spring, you dug and planted. In summer, you weeded, tended, hoped. In autumn, you gathered, stored, counted. In winter, you rested, or at least tried to. There were repairs to make, tools to fix, bread to bake. But now, with the harvest gone and no grain stored, winter doesn't feel like rest. It feels like an extension of a punishment you don't remember earning. You try to light the fire, the kindling is damp, the peat is crumbly and weak. You blow until your lungs hurt and eventually the coals catch. The flames are small and angry, but they're alive. You warm your hands and then hers. She stirs, eyes flicking open, and mumbles something about breakfast. You hand her a sliver of dried bark cake and pretend it's enough. You step outside again to gather what little you can. The frost has killed most of the wild greens. Sorrel has wilted into mush, nettles are dry and brittle, and even the weeds seem to have given up. You find one half-frozen root and dig it out with your fingers, hands going numb. You can't tell if it's a carrot or a parsnip, doesn't matter, it's food. You know the hunger is changing you. You move more slowly, your thoughts come in fragments. Sometimes you walk into a room and forget why. You say the wrong words, you stare too long at nothing. Your daughter told you yesterday that your voice sounded strange. You didn't notice. You boil the root with a bit of yesterday's gruel and a pinch of old salt that you'd forgotten you had. It tastes like the inside of a wooden spoon, but it's warm and your daughter eats without complaint. You wonder how she's still so quiet. She used to hum while she chewed. Used to tell you stories about imaginary beasts and glowing rivers. Now she just swallows and watches the fire. Later you walk to the church, hoping they're handing out charity bread again. The line is long, too long. By the time you reach the front, the last of the loaves are gone. The monk at the door shrugs and says, "God will provide." You want to slap him. Instead, you nod abort and walk away. Some of the villagers talk about fleeing, heading south toward the coast or inland toward the forests. But there's nowhere left to run. Famine isn't local anymore. It's everywhere. And the road is worse than staying put. There are travellers, bands of hungry men who have nothing left to lose. You've heard of entire families disappearing. You've seen the fear in people's eyes when someone knocks on a door too late at night. So you stay, you wait, you endure. The old seasonal rhythms are broken now. And with them, something in your spirit has cracked too. In past winters, even the hard ones, there was structure. You could say, "Only until Candlemas," or "We'll be planting again soon." But now, there's no promise of spring, there's no seed, no certainty. The tools lie untouched in the shed, their wooden handles warped from disuse. You haven't sharpened the sickle in months. Why would you? You remember when the church used to ring the bells to mark the seasons. Ascension, Michaelmas, Advent. You haven't heard the bells in weeks. Maybe they're saving the metal for something else. Maybe there's no one left strong enough to pull the rope. There's an old debate among scholars about how deeply these seasonal patterns structured peasant life. Some claim the cycle of planting and harvest was a kind of spiritual metronome, a way to find peace, even in suffering. Others argue that hunger could break that rhythm completely, reducing people to day-to-day survival with no sense of the larger wheel of the year. Standing here in a frozen field with no crops and no calendar, you know where you fall in that argument. Your days have no names now, just cold mornings and colder nights, just the question, what can I eat today? Your daughter begins coughing again in the evening, dry, shallow. She doesn't have the strength to make it loud. You rub her back, warm her hands, and feed her a few sips of broth. You tell her a story about the winter birds, how they carry messages between sleeping trees. She listens, barely, but she listens. That night, you try to remember what month it is. November, December. You don't know. You remember that your birthday was sometime around now. You don't mention it. What would be the point? You lie awake long after your daughter falls asleep, staring at the ceiling and listening to the wind. It doesn't howl anymore. It groans. You think about the tools in the shed, still waiting. You think about the frozen field. You think about a spring that may never come. The fire dims. You don't add more fuel. You just pull your daughter closer and close your eyes. You dream of planting. You dig into the soil with your bare hands, but instead of seeds, you find bones. The sky breaks open for a few hours, and though it doesn't exactly qualify as sun, it's lighter than usual, pale grey shifting toward a sort of milky silver. It feels strange standing outside in it. Your eyes squint like they've forgotten how to process brightness. The cold's still there, of course, but not biting. Just lingering. A dull ache instead of a blade. You take it as a sign. Maybe not of hope, let's not get ridiculous, but of opportunity. You wrap a tattered scarf around your daughter's neck and pull the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Then you head out, bucket in hand, toward the hedgerows on the outskirts of the village. It's risky, yes. A wasted trip could cost you precious strength. But you've heard rumours. Someone saw berries. Probably not enough to fill a hand, but anything that grows uninvited this late in the year is worth the gamble. The ground is stiff but not yet frozen solid, and your boots crunch against the brittle grass as you move. The hedgerow looms up ahead, gnarled, twisted branches, dry leaves still clinging like stubborn ghosts. In the warmer months, this place bursts with green life. Blackberries, gooseberries, wild strawberries, even the occasional hazelnut. You remember dragging your daughter out here on a summer afternoon years ago, her face smeared with juice, her laughter floating over the grass. Now the branches are stripped, the underbrush brittle. Still, you kneel down and begin the search. Carefully, slowly. And there, after 20 minutes of clawing through thorns and stinging your hands on nettles you thought were dead, you find them. A cluster of shriveled rose hips, dark red and dusty but clinging stubbornly to the stalks. You pull them gently one by one and drop them into your pocket. Nearby you spot a handful of hawthorn berries, wrinkled and half-frozen, but intact. Then a small miracle, a patch of sloe berries. Hard and bitter, but they're there. You pick what you can, fingers going numb as you pull at stems and twist berries free. Some are half rotten. You leave those behind. Others are almost sweet when you press them to your tongue. Tart, like the memory of better fruit. It's barely a handful all told, but it's enough to call it a good day. You head home slowly, one eye on the tree line. No one is out here now, not this far from the cottages. Safer than it was weeks ago. Most of the travelling desperate have moved on or died, but the fear never really leaves. You keep your knife ready in your belt just in case. Back at home, your daughter is asleep by the fire. You stroke her hair, then set to work. First you wash the berries, stripping away bits of leaf and twig. Then you boil them, softly, gently, with just enough water to cover. They split open, releasing their sharp scent into the air. It smells like autumn, like life. You mash the boiled berries through a scrap of cloth, straining out seeds and skins. What's left is a thin paste, reddish and murky, but rich in that way only famine food can be. Real, fresh, growing from the ground, rich. You stir in a bit of acorn flour to thicken it, then shape the mixture into little cakes and lay them by the fire to dry. When they're firm enough to hold, you give one to your daughter. She bites it carefully. Her eyes widen. "It's sweet," she whispers. You nod. "A little." "It's real," she adds. And she's right. It is. Wild berries are the last gift of the old year. A kind of closing note. Usually gone by now, but this year the cold came late and the famine came early. And the two overlapped just enough to leave a few scraps behind. You thank the hedgerows in your mind. You picture them waiting through the long months, roots deep, holding secrets under the frost. There's debate among historians about just how much wild fruit peasants relied on. Some records barely mention berries at all. Others describe children sent into the fields with baskets to forage for every last bit of vitamin C before winter turned their teeth to powder. Scurvy isn't just for sailors after all. A season without fruit is fine. 2 or 3. That's when people start bleeding from the gums and losing teeth with every bite. You think of that now, chewing your tart little cake, imagining your cells cheering as the juice slides down your throat. You don't know what vitamins are, but you know when your body says thank you. This is one of those moments. The rest of the berry mash you mix with a little boiled grain and mould into a sort of pudding. It's sticky and strange and barely holds together, but it looks like something festive. Your daughter insists on saving it for a special day. You don't argue. She wants to pretend it's a treat, so let it be one. That night, the wind picks up. A storm rolls in. Not snow, not yet, but the kind of slicing rain that freezes halfway down. You patch the holes in the walls with straw and hang an old cloth across the door. The fire struggles to stay lit. The warmth from the berries lingers, though like a memory. Your daughter sleeps beside you, one hand still clinging to the cloth-wrapped berry cake she didn't finish. You press your hand against her back, she's breathing steady. You wonder if the trees know, if they feel the way you do, hollow, waiting, listening for something that may never come again. Spring is far off, too far to picture, but today, for a few bright moments, the hedgerow remembered you, gave you something living. You dream of a summer field full of berries so ripe they fall into your hand. No thorns, no hunger, just sweetness. Ooh. You wake up to wind, and the storm, and the fire still going. You wake with the wind still banging at the shutters, and the thatch above your head creaking with every gust. One of the roof beams has started leaking again. Slow drips plop into a wooden bowl near the hearth. The storm didn't break in the night like you'd hoped. If anything, it's worse now, louder, hungrier. It's the kind of wind that sounds like it's trying to find a way inside your bones. You stay under the blanket a few minutes longer, wrapped around your daughter like you can block out the world by sheer will. But your stomach has other plans. It growls long and low, like it's trying to remind you that berry cakes only go so far. You feel lightheaded when you sit up. A bit of vertigo spins the room for a second, but you blink hard and push through it. No time to be dizzy. There's work to do. There's always work, even when there's no energy left to do it. Today you're going underground, roots and tubers, nature's buried secrets. That's what the old ones always said. When nothing else grows, the earth still hides food in its depths. Parsnips, carrots, turnips, even wild onions if you're lucky. They're not pretty, not the prize crops of feasts and festivals, but they keep people alive when the fields have nothing left to say. You gather your digging stick and wrap your scarf tight against your face. The wind slices down the path as you walk, cold and sharp like broken glass. No one else is out, not in this weather, just you and the grey. You head toward the edge of the woods, where the soil is softer and the wild things sometimes grow unnoticed. The digging is slow and hard, and the ground's half frozen and packed with roots so tangled they fight you back. You chip away at the surface with your stick, fingers stiff and clumsy, knees soaked from kneeling in the mud. It's miserable work, and that's before your back starts to spasm. But after an hour, you find it. A turnip, small, cracked, a little worm-eaten but intact. It comes loose with a wet squelch and you hold it up like a treasure. You keep going. Another hour, another find. A wild carrot, so thin it's barely more than a root, but it smells like something real. Then a knot of burdock root, thick and hairy. You'll have to scrub it forever to make it edible. But it's heavy in your hand. That alone makes it precious. You think about the stories your mother told you of famine years long ago, where people survived entire winters on what they could dig from the earth. Not the fields, the woods, the ditches, the forgotten corners. One woman, she said, once fed her whole family on wild parsnips and cattail roots, boiling them into thick pastes and calling it marrow stew. You never knew if that story was real, but it feels real now. Historically, root vegetables were the peasant's pantry, reliable, storable, unspectacular. In good years, they filled the gaps between meats and grains. In bad years, they were the main event. You remember a feast day long ago where someone made roasted turnips with honey and herbs. You thought it was fancy. Now you'd kill for a plain boiled one. There's some disagreement among scholars about which wild roots were actually used by peasants during famines. Some records mention parsnips and leeks. Others point to lesser-known plants, like hogweed root or Alexander's. A few theories even suggest that underground parts of common weeds were boiled and eaten, though those would have been risky. Some roots nourish, some kill. The line is thin. You've rolled the dice more than once. Back home, your fingers are too numb to untie the scarf, so you just yank it off. Your daughter rushes to the door when she sees the bundle in your arms. "Is that a carrot?" she asks, eyes wide. "Sort of," you say. "As I call it one." You scrub the roots clean in a bowl of cold water. The burdock takes the longest, caked with mud and full of tiny stones. You peel it with a bit of shell and slice it into thin rounds. Everything goes into the pot, even the bits you'd normally toss. There's no room for waste now. You add a little ash for flavour and a chunk of old bark bread to thicken it. It's a strange recipe, one only a famine could invent. The stew simmers slowly, filling the room with an earthy, sour scent. It's not good, not really, but it smells like food, and that's become a rare pleasure. Your daughter stirs the pot while you clean your hands. You can't feel your fingertips, but you don't say anything. No need to worry her. When the stew is done, you share it between 2 bowls. You eat sitting close to the fire, holding the bowls in your palms like they might float away. The turnip is bitter. The burdoc's tough. The carrot sliver is the best part, still vaguely sweet, with just a hint of that old familiar flavour. You chew slowly, eyes closed, pretending it's a whole plate of roast vegetables, seasoned with the oil and herbs. Your daughter licks her bowl clean. "Will there be more tomorrow?" she asks. "If I can dig it," you say. Hoi. She nods like that's the most natural thing in the world. That night, after she's asleep, you sit by the fire with the last chunk of parsnip in your hand. You're tempted to save it, bury it again, maybe try to plant it come spring, if spring comes, but your stomach growls and the cold presses in, and you know how foolish that hope is. You eat it raw, chewing slowly, savouring the sting of bitterness on your tongue. You dream of fields full of roots, easy to pull, clean and sweet. You don't even need a digging stick. You just reach down and lift them free. Then you wake, and your hands still ache. The sky's the colour of ash today, flat and unmoving, like a lid clamped down over the world. Even the birds seem to have given up. You haven't heard a single chirp in days, not even the crows, and that's never a good sign. You step outside into the kind of cold that doesn't slap you, doesn't sting. It just settles over your shoulders like a damp wool blanket and stays there. Heavy. Permanent. You adjust your scarf and glance toward the fields, to the place where the Lord's harvest once stood. It's strange how the fields look so clean now. Rows raked flat with barely a single leftover stalk poking through the crust of frost. But you know that's not nature's doing. That's gleaning. Months of it. Dozens of villagers combing through every inch of those fields hoping for what the reapers missed. A grain here. A husk there. Sometimes even a worm. You've done it yourself more times than you can count. Gleaning is supposed to be your right. One of the few protections peasants cling to when everything else is stripped away. After the harvest, when the Lord's share is gathered, and the cartloads rolled off to his granaries, the poor are allowed to collect the scraps. The law, what little of it leans in your direction, says you can walk those fields and take whatever's left. But this year there wasn't much to begin with. And what little did remain was fought over, sometimes literally. You remember the last time you went gleaning mid-autumn when the frost hadn't yet hardened the ground? You and your daughter walked those fields for hours. You picked over the dirt with your fingers, shaping at the soil for fallen grain. Found 7 kernels total. She found a broken stalk with 2 tiny underdeveloped heads of barley. You brought them home like trophies. Today, though, you're not gleaning grain. That ship has long since sailed and the fields are mostly dead now. But maybe, just maybe, someone overlooked something. A forgotten root vegetable, a few dried peas, even a carrot top. You know it's unlikely. But when you're this hungry, unlikely becomes good odds. You walk the edge of the field slowly, eyes down, hands wrapped in cloth to keep them from going stiff. The soil crunches underfoot. Occasionally you find a stone and flip it over, hoping to discover something clinging to the underside. Nothing. A few patches of dried weeds, a wilted thistle. You tug it up and stuff it into your bag anyway. At the far end of the field you spot another figure. An older woman, thin as a broom handle, wrapped in 3 cloaks and still shivering. She nods at you but doesn't speak. No one wastes words anymore. You both know why you're here. You nod back, then continue along the edge, where the field meets the old hedgerow. That's where you find it. A single dried pea pod, brittle but intact, clinging to a curling brown vine. You break it off carefully, like it might shatter in your fingers. Inside 3 wrinkled peas. Tiny, hard as pebbles, but perfect. You don't eat them, you don't even think about it. You tuck them into the cloth lining your pouch. They're seed. And that makes them holy. You keep going, heart beating a little faster now. The next few yards give you nothing, then suddenly a half-rotted beet, half buried in frozen mud. You dig it out with a stick, peel off the blackened outer layer and smile. It's edible, if you boil it long enough. Back home you lay out your finds. A small pile, but a proud one. The beet, the thistle, a few tough leaves from the edge of the woods, and of course the peas. You don't tell your daughter about the peas, not yet. You don't want to explain why she can't eat them. There's debate among scholars, you've heard, about how common gleaning really was in the Middle Ages. Some insist it was widespread, built into the very structure of rural life. Others say it was more symbolic than practical, more about the appearance of charity than the reality of survival. You don't care about the academic arguments. You care that you've lived it, and that it's humiliating and brutal and necessary. The thing about gleaning is, it shows you just how invisible you really are. The Lord doesn't come out to see who's in his fields. He doesn't care. You're like birds scavenging after the real work is done. Except the birds have wings and better instincts. You boil the beet for hours. It doesn't soften much, but the water turns a dark pink, and that feels luxurious somehow. Like colour alone has calories. Your daughter says it tastes like old pennies, but she eats every bite. You think about the seed peas again, hidden in your pouch. You remember planting last spring when your hands were still strong and your mind was still full of plans. You remember pushing peas into the soil, spacing them carefully, patting the dirt down like a lullaby. Maybe, if there's another spring, you'll plant these too, if no one eats them first. Later, you sneak out behind the house and dig a hole near the back wall. Not for planting, for hiding. You wrap the peas in cloth, place them in a small clay pot and bury them deep. It feels like burying treasure. Or a promise. Your daughter watches you from the doorway. She doesn't ask what you're doing, she just says, "Are we eating tomorrow?" You nod. Yes. She doesn't ask with what. You lie beside her that night, both of you wrapped in the same threadbare blanket, listening to the wind rattling through the chimney. The fire has gone out, but you're too tired to care. In your dreams, you're walking the fields again, but this time they're golden, warm, overflowing. Your basket is heavy. Your hands are full. You wake up with your fingers clenched, still trying to hold on to that dream. It starts with a smell. Not bad exactly, but sharp. Acrid. Familiar in a way you can't place at first. You sniff the air as you stir from sleep, the blanket heavy across your lay, your daughter curled tightly against your side like a kitten seeking heat. You blink, sniff again, and then it hits you. Smoke. Not firewood though, something richer. Something fatty. Something that's been preserved and now, miraculously, is being cooked. You throw on your shawl and step outside, heart suddenly pounding. A few other villagers are doing the same, coming out of their huts, thin shapes wrapped in layers, noses lifted toward the sky like hounds catching a scent. The trail leads you down the lane, past the old cooper's workshop toward the baker's ruined hut. The place burned down years ago and has been empty ever since. Except now there's smoke rising from the chimney. You peer through the cracked window and see her, Marta. She's bent over a fire, turning something on a spit. It's small, round, and dripping fat into a shallow pan. You can't tell what it is exactly, but you know what it means. She's found meat. Or something close. She glances up and sees you. Her eyes narrow, just a flicker. And then she looks away. She doesn't invite you in. No one does anymore. By midday the smell is gone. Either the meat is gone too, or she's taken it off the fire. People whisper. Some say it was rat, others say pigeon. One man swears it was a hedgehog roasted with thistle and salt. You wonder if that last part, the salt, is wishful thinking. The truth is, when real food shows up now, it causes tension. Not joy, not celebration, suspicion. The question is always the same. Where did you get it? And what did it cost? Preservation used to be a simple thing, a task done before winter with pride and purpose. You smoked meat over alderwood, salted fish in barrels, pickled roots in brine. It was as much ritual as necessity, passing down knowledge from hand to hand. But now, preserving has become desperation's art. You've smoked things you'd never have touched before. Dried things you weren't sure were safe. And salt. Salt might as well be gold. You remember the last time you saw real salt? A fist-sized lump traded between 3 families like a relic. You were offered a sniff in exchange for half a loaf of acorn bread. You took it and made your mouth water in a way that hurt. Today you're attempting your own version of preserved food. Not meat, those days are long gone, but something almost as precious, mushrooms. You found a few under a fallen log yesterday, firm, dry, not slimy. You didn't eat them immediately because you weren't entirely sure they wouldn't kill you. But after checking their smell, their gills, their colour, and asking the old man who once served as village forager, you feel safe enough. You slice them thin and thread them on a bit of twine, hanging them above the fire to dry. It's a gamble. They might mould, they might shrivel to dust. But if they last, they'll be worth their weight in lard come next week. There's a lot of debate, both in your village and among the dusty scholars far from here, about whether peasants in famine years had the skill to preserve food properly. Some say you lacked the tools, the time, the knowledge. Others believe you had a whole language of preservation that simply never made it into the official records. You know which camp you fall into. You've seen Marta salt a fish so thoroughly it could survive until Pentecost. You've seen children string apples to dry like garlands, watched widows bury root vegetables in ash-lined pits to keep the frost off. Survival teaches you what books never will. But preservation isn't just about technique, it's about having something to preserve in the first place. That's the real challenge. You can't smoke thin air, you can't dry a dream. You glance over at your storage nook. If it could laugh, it would. 3 shriveled apples, a twist of dried beet peel, and a hard crust of barley bread that might outlast civilization. Not exactly a winter's supply. Still, you work. You slice the mushrooms, string them carefully. You gather dry grass for the fire, trying to control the smoke. You even rub a bit of salt you scrounge from the bottom of a forgotten jar onto the slices. Just a pinch, just enough to pretend. As they hang, your daughter watches, quiet and curious. Will we eat them tomorrow? Not yet, you say. Later, when we really need them. She nods. She's learning the rhythm now. Eat today, save for worse. Always expect worse. Later that day, you try another trick, cold smoking. You build a little box from scraps of wood, poke holes in it, and hang the last bit of dried turnip inside while feeding a smouldering bundle of herbs underneath. It smells like old shoes and sour hay, but the turnip doesn't rot. You count that as success. Food, when it's preserved, feels like time itself, like something you've captured and stored away, a moment you can reach into later and say, "We made it to this day," is the closest thing you have to control. But preservation can also lie to you. A piece of meat might look safe, smell fine, taste okay, and then twist your guts until you're begging for death. You've seen it. Twice now. A boy who ate spoiled eel, a woman who bit into bad cheese. Their suffering lasted hours, the funerals minutes. That night you check the mushroom slices. They're drier, curling a little. You flip them, adjust the twine. It feels good to do something with your hands again. Something that isn't just reacting to misery. Something that looks forward. You lie beside your daughter and whisper stories, new ones. You tell her about a girl who lived in a forest and knew the secret names of every root and herb. She could cure sickness, banish hunger, even call deer from the trees. Your daughter asks what the girl ate. You tell her dried mushrooms, smoked fish, and bread soaked in honey. Is that real? She asks. You say, it was, once. She believes you, and for a moment so do you. The market is barely recognizable now. Once it was a place of chatter and clatter, laughter, carts creaking under the weight of goods, dogs barking over scraps, the warm stink of too many people pressed together. It was noisy, loud with life. Not joyful exactly, it was still a peasant's market, but alive. Now it's a ghost of itself. No shouting, no music, just the sound of slow feet on frozen ground and quiet voices haggling over nothing. You arrive early before the light has fully settled over the frost-covered rooftops. Your breath clouds in front of your face as you step through what used to be the main square. Stalls still stand, wooden frames stripped of canvas covers, leaning like crooked teeth. One is empty but for a single cracked pot. Another has a pile of withered roots laid out on a threadbare cloth, guarded by a woman whose eyes dare you to ask the price. You've come with a pouch of trade, if it can even be called that. A bit of dried mushroom, the last of the ash-preserved beet, a handful of rabbit fur scraps. You kept those fur pieces from an old trade and have tried to pass them off as usable for patching. Truthfully, they're barely more than fluff. But in a famine year, fluff sometimes buys food. You make a slow circuit. The offerings are meagre. One man sells waterlogged oats by the handful, scooped from a wooden bucket with a cracked ladle. Another has something he insists is dried plum, though it looks suspiciously like a chunk of tree bark soaked in vinegar. You don't ask questions, you know better. Everyone's lying a little now. Everyone's stretching truth like old dough, thin and full of holes. You stop at a stall where a girl, no more than 12, is selling something wrapped in cloth. She opens it when you ask, a small brick of flour. You don't ask what it's made from, probably barley, possibly acorns, maybe bone. The colour is wrong, too pale, almost grey. You offer your mushrooms. She hesitates, then nods. You walk away with the flour in your pocket, your hand cupped around it like a flame. It won't make a loaf, maybe a dumpling, maybe a soup thickener, but it's something. You see a few familiar faces, thinner now, more hollow. One woman you knew well last year, who once traded you cheese in spring, has lost all her teeth. Another man, once the loudest voice on market day, now sits behind an empty stall, head down, hands in his lap like he's forgotten how to sell. As the steward's guards look worse for wear, mud on their boots, skin chapped and bleeding around the knuckles. Hunger makes everyone look like ghosts dressed in old clothes. Then you hear the first shout. At the far end of the square, a group has gathered. Someone's arguing. A man is holding a loaf aloft. Dark, dense, raspberry in twine. He claims to have grain. Real grain. Rye, maybe even wheat. People push in, too fast, too desperate. Coins fly, one woman throws a pair of shoes, someone else shouts, "Yo, it's fake!" Too late. The loaf's already broken apart, passed hand to hand, split into fragments. You don't move. You just watch. You've seen it before. These bread riots don't usually end in violence, but they always end in disappointment. Either the loaf turns out to be half sawdust, or the seller vanishes with the coin, leaving everyone clutching crumbs and rage. A few minutes later, it's over. The crowd disperses. The man is gone. The loaf was mostly bark and meal. Everyone knew it, but they had to try. You understand. You'd have done the same last week, maybe even yesterday. There's an open scholarly debate about how much medieval markets truly suffered during famine years. Some records suggest they simply thinned, but others describe them collapsing entirely. Empty stalls, no grain, nothing but the trade by word and whisper. You're living through the latter. It's not a market anymore. It's a stage, and the only play left is desperation. As you turn to leave, you notice a small group gathered near the church steps. They are not selling. They're praying. Not loudly, just kneeling, eyes closed, hands open to the sky. You recognize one of them, Thomas, the baker's apprentice. He used to whistle while loading loaves into the oven. Now he looks like he hasn't eaten in days. You nod at him. He doesn't see you. Back home, your daughter waits near the fire. She perks up when she sees the flour. You mix it into a paste with water and a pinch of dried herb. It smells faintly like mint, or mould. You boil it until it thickens into something that pretends to be porridge. She eats her portion in 2 bites. You take yours slower, stretching it out, letting the warm go all the way down. That night she asks why you go to the market when there's nothing to buy. You tell her. Sometimes you go just to remember you're not the only one. She's quiet after that. You lie awake long after she's asleep thinking about the bread riot. About the man holding that loaf like it was a holy relic. About the girl who traded you flour. About the monk on the church steps who said, "God will provide," and gave out nothing. You dream of a real market, baskets overflowing with eggs, fruit piled high, cheese wheels cut open like treasure chests. You're walking through it, but no one sees you. You try to speak, but you have no mouth. You wake to silence. The kind of silence that's not peace, but the absence of anything else. You stir the fire back to life, feed it a few precious sticks. You look at the flour pouch again. It's empty. Tomorrow maybe the market will be better. Or maybe it won't. You'll go anyway. The church bell rings at dawn. One slow, dragging note that echoes through the frozen streets like a warning. It's not Sunday. It's not a funeral. This time it means something else. Alms. You sit up immediately, brushing sleep from your face and feeling every ache along your spine. Your daughter stirs beside you, her small body cold to the touch. She hears the bell too and doesn't ask questions, just starts getting dressed, movement sluggish but steady. You both know the drill by now. Outside, the village is already gathering. Word must have spread last night. The steward has allowed the abbey to open its kitchens this morning, likely under pressure from the Lord, or maybe out of some lingering guilt passed off as mercy. It doesn't matter. Charity is charity, no matter how bitter the aftertaste. When you arrive at the gates of the churchyard, there are dozens ahead of you, all wrapped in shawls and rags, each clutching an empty bowl like a relic. You fall into line silently. The air smells of smoke and boiled broth. That alone is enough to make your mouth water. It's been 3 days since either of you had anything more than bark-thickened gruel. The idea of something warm, something made in a real kitchen, is enough to draw people from their beds despite the frost on the ground and the heavy clouds rolling low across the sky. The monks move slowly, ladling thin soup into each bowl, murmuring blessings that sound half-hearted at best. The broth is pale, barely more than hot water, dotted with what looks like oats and floating scraps of leaf. Cabbage, maybe, or beet tops. A few lucky ones get a small hunk of coarse bread, hard as stone but soaked soft in the soup. It's not much, but in this world, it's something close to a feast. When your turn comes, you bow your head out of habit, though the monk doesn't meet your eye. He fills your bowl without a word. You step aside quickly so the next person can move up, then you crouch with your daughter in the corner of the yard, under the crumbling statue of some forgotten saint. The stone's face is weathered smooth, but the folds of the robe remain. Your daughter eats fast, head bent low, both hands around the bowl. You do the same. The soup is thin. It tastes like smoke and a memory of onion. But it's hot, and it stays down, and for a few minutes your body believes in warmth again. The bread, if you can call it that, has the texture of boiled bark and the flavour of sawdust, but it softens in the soup, and you chew every bite until your jaw aches. You glance around the yard. No one speaks. Everyone eats like they're afraid the food might vanish if they look up. A young boy in the far corner licks his bowl clean, then clutches it to his chest like he might use it again, just in case. An old man drops to his knees while eating, maybe out of piety, maybe out of sheer exhaustion. No one moves to help him. There's nothing left to spare. Charity during famine is a strange thing. It's not kindness, it's rationed pity. The monks don't serve with compassion, they serve with discipline. There's no eye contact, no extra ladle, no warmth in their voices. They do what the Lord expects. No more, no less. Historically, monastic kitchens played a significant role in feeding the poor during times of famine, especially in places where the local lord refused to distribute grain. Some were generous, offering alms, bread, even medical care. Others gave just enough to stave off public disorder. Most walked the line between divine obligation and practical self-preservation. You're never sure which side your local abbey falls on. There's an ongoing debate among scholars about whether medieval charity was a system of salvation or a tool of control. Did the church give because it believed in mercy, or because hungry peasants were more likely to riot? You have your own opinion. You've seen the look in the monk's eyes. This isn't about love. This is about keeping the peace. After the meal, you return your bowl to the stack by the church wall. A nun gestures toward a crate of small loaves. They're passing them out to families with children. You step forward, and after a pause, she hands you one. It's warm, still warm. Your daughter's eyes go wide. You tuck it under your arm and head home fast before someone changes their mind. Back at the cottage, you set the loaf on the table like a jewel. You don't cut it. You tear it with your hands. Inside, the crumb is dense and a little sour, but there are flecks of real grain in it. You eat half and save the rest for evening. It's the best thing you've tasted in weeks. Later that day, you return to the church, not for more food, but for news. The monks sometimes post notices about grain deliveries or medicinal supplies. Today, there's nothing new. Just the same tired prayers written on wax tablets. But you overhear two of the brothers discussing the upcoming feast of St. Brigid. They say the kitchen may open again then. You mark the day in your mind, carving it into your thoughts like a tally. You think about the old stories, saints feeding hundreds with one loaf, monks multiplying fish, God turning water into wine. You've stopped believing in miracles, but you haven't stopped hoping for soup. Before bed, your daughter asks if you can go back to the abbey tomorrow. You shake your head. Not until the bell rings again, you say. We wait. She's quiet, then whispers, "We'll hear it again soon." You want to believe that. That night, you tuck the remaining piece of bread into a cloth and hide it beneath your blanket just in case rats or neighbours come sniffing. It's hard as a rock by morning, but still edible, still precious. You dream of long wooden tables, of candles flickering against stone walls, of monks passing loaves down the line, laughing. In the dream, your bowl is always full. You wake up hungry, of course, but you still have bread. The loaf from the abbey is gone by mid-morning. Not that it was large to begin with, and certainly not enough to make it through the day, but it went down warm, shared between you and your daughter in silence. Both of you chewing each bite as if your teeth might never get another chance. Now your belly is only slightly less hollow, but it's tricked, for a few hours at least, into feeling like it might not consume itself today. That's what food is now, not fuel, not pleasure, just a brief distraction from the gnawing. Still you're uneasy. Something's not right. It started with the bread. Not the loaf from the monks, that was dense and sour, sure, but it came from a kitchen that still resembles a kitchen. You mean the last loaf you made yourself? The one stretched with root scrapings and a bit of stale barley flour. You remember biting into it and feeling a sting, not on your tongue but in your gut. Wrongness that started small and got louder. You chewed slower, watched your daughter more closely. She seemed fine, but you couldn't stop thinking about it. By the afternoon, the ache in your stomach has grown sharper. Not just hunger anymore, this is something else, cramping, a twisting pain that doubles you over when you stand too fast. Your daughter asks if you're all right, and you lie. Of course you do. That's what parents do in a famine, pretend. You sit by the hearth, rubbing your side and thinking through every ingredient. Nothing new, nothing poisonous, you're sure of it. But then again, you're not really sure of anything anymore. When your ingredients list includes moss, bark, roots you can't name, and flour that may or may not have been gnawed on by something with too many legs, certainty is a luxury. You remember a story from early in the famine about a man who tried to make stew from dried dock roots and mushrooms. They weren't even the poisonous kind, supposedly, but they hadn't been cleaned properly, bits of rot left behind or a few mouldy scraps tossed in without thinking. The whole family got sick, not violently, just steadily worse. Diarrhea, weakness, hallucinations, then stillness. There's a fringe belief you've heard whispered since childhood that certain famine foods carry not just risk of illness, but a kind of curse, a spiritual sickness, that eating what should not be eaten, mouldy bread, scavenged rot, food meant for animals, can twist the soul as much as the stomach. Superstition, of course. But when you're curled on the floor, cramping and shaking, it's hard not to believe in invisible punishments. You manage to drink a bit of warm water, and that helps. A little. Enough to sit upright again at least. Your daughter is quiet, playing with a smooth stone she's kept since summer, tracing patterns in the soot beside the hearth. You watch her hands move and try to keep your mind from spiralling. When the light starts to fade, you force yourself to prepare something for the evening meal. There's not much left, just a thin strip of beet, a few leaves of something vaguely green, and some of the questionable flour you traded for at the market. You boil it all into a paste and call it soup, but when it's done, the smell turns your stomach. Your daughter eats anyway, without comment. That alone is terrifying. She's never refused food before, not even the worst bark bread. You ask her if it tastes off. She shrugs, says no. But you know she's lying too now, that makes two of you. You try a spoonful, the taste is metallic. Not sharp, not acidic, just wrong. Flat and bitter, like wet stone and old leaves. You force it down and take another. Then stop. You scrape the rest into the fire when your daughter's not looking. Later your body rebels again. Not violently, no fever, no vomiting, but a creeping illness in your bones. Like your blood has gone sluggish. You lie down early and wrap yourself tight in the blanket, shivering though the room isn't cold. Your daughter lies beside you, her hand resting gently on your arm. "Will you be better tomorrow?" she asks. You tell her yes. You have no idea. There's an open question among historians, one they love to argue about, concerning the real cost of famine foods. Not just the deaths from outright starvation, but the slow deaths, the lingering ones. What happens to a body fed on rot and ash and false bread? Some scholars believe these years left scars that never healed. Gut diseases, organ failure, long-term weakness passed down to children born after the famine had ended. Others argue that the peasant body adapted, somehow learned to digest poison just enough to keep breathing. You wonder which theory you're proving right now. By candlelight, you examine the flour you brought home from the market again. It smells fine, musty, but not foul. You stir it with a bit of water and wait. Within minutes, bubbles rise, oddly fast, too fast, fermentation, spoilage. You can't tell anymore. All you know is your belly still hurts and your daughter's eyes look sunken. In the morning, you plan to go to Marta. She has knowledge of roots and herbs, passed down through God knows how many grandmothers. Maybe she'll have something to soothe the pain. Maybe she'll ask for more than you can pay. You'll go anyway. For now, you lie still and breathe through the cramps. You count the spaces between them. You try not to think about what you've eaten in the last week. You try not to remember the old warnings. If it smells too sweet, it's not safe. If it tastes too bitter, it's already spoiled. You whisper a prayer to no one in particular, pressing your lips against your daughter's hair. Your stomach growls again. Not hunger this time. Something else. You close your eyes and listen to the fire crackle, like a mouth chewing dry leaves. You've done a lot of unthinkable things since the famine began, things you never imagined yourself doing, not in dreams, not in nightmares. Eating bark, digging up rotten vegetables from frozen earth, bargaining with priests, stealing a turnip from an abandoned shed and lying about it when someone asked. But the hardest part, the thing that still doesn't sit right in your chest even now, is choosing who eats first. You wake up weak, throat dry, limbs sore. Your stomach hasn't stopped aching, though the sharpness from yesterday has dulled. into something low and constant, like a bell that never quite stops ringing. Your daughter sleeps next to you, curled like a comma, her breath shallow and steady. You watch her ribs rise and fall, and you wonder, quietly, without letting the thought take full shape, how much longer she can last like this. The hunger is crueler with children. They fade differently. Adults buckle under it, collapse, but children stretch out the fall. They lose their appetite first, then their curiosity. Their laughter fades into silence. Eventually, their eyes stop moving. You've seen it happen. The baker's youngest, the stable boy, even the steward's own niece, though no one says it out loud. You sit up and try to move without waking her. Your legs shake when they touch the floor. Your arms feel like they belong to someone else, someone older, more brittle. You make your way to the hearth and rekindle the coals with a bit of dry moss and twigs. The flame flickers to life with some effort, and you warm your hands while planning the day's meal, or what passes for it. There's barely anything left. A handful of dried greens, a bit of root you found yesterday, questionable but not immediately lethal, and half of a cake of bark bread that could crack a tooth if you're not careful. You boil water and steep the greens, you shave the root into thin slices, you chew the bread slowly to soften it before adding it to the pot. The resulting stew is as watery as it is bitter. You ladle it into a small bowl and set it beside your daughter's sleeping form. She stirs at the scent, blinking, lips chapped and eyes sunken. She doesn't smile, hasn't in days, but she sits up and takes the bowl with both hands. "Did you eat?" she asks. You nod. Lie. She takes a few bites, careful, watching you the whole time. You force yourself to sip from your own bowl, even though it tastes like boiled weeds and regret. She doesn't finish hers. After a few minutes she sets it down, her hands trembling. "Not hungry," she mumbles. That phrase used to be an annoyance, now it terrifies you. You beg her, gently, quietly, to try a little more. She does, for you, but you can see it's an effort, a performance. Later she sleeps again and you stare at her unfinished bowl. You should eat it. You're weaker than you've ever been, but you can't. You can't bring yourself to steal her portion, even if she left it willingly. So you pour it back into the pot and set it aside for evening. Maybe she'll be stronger later. Maybe you will. You think of your mother, years ago during a lean winter. Not a famine, just a hard season. She used to eat the scraps off your plate after you'd gone to bed. Said she'd already eaten. You knew she was lying, but you let her. Now you understand. There's a quiet debate among scholars who study these years, mostly argued from the comfort of warm, well-fed lecture halls. How did peasant families divide food during famine? Did parents feed children first? Did the strongest eat to survive and carry the rest? Or did it come down to luck and cruelty? Who could fight hardest for the last scrap? Some records suggest families tried to keep children alive at all costs. Others hint at darker truths, abandonment, sacrifice, the unthinkable. You know it's not always noble. Sometimes the hunger gets ahead of your better judgment. There are moments, short, shameful ones, when you look at the food in your hand and tell yourself you need it more. Not because you're selfish, because you're the one who forages, who digs, who cooks. If you collapse, there's no one left to find food at all. It's not a choice you make once, it's one you make every day. A few weeks ago you heard of a family that rationed food based on usefulness. The grandfather went first, he was the only one who knew how to trap birds. Then the older daughter, who could still walk to the woods. The baby went last. Not because they didn't love her, because she couldn't do anything to help. You remember the look on the mother's face when she told the story, like she was confessing to a crime no one could punish her for. You haven't had to make that kind of decision yet, but the line is getting closer, every day. That afternoon you find a bit of relief. Marta brings by a small parcel wrapped in cloth. Inside are 2 soft apples, a handful of dried beans, and, miraculously, a pinch of salt. She says nothing, just hands it over and leaves. You don't ask why. Maybe she had more than she needed. Maybe she saw the way your daughter was looking at the ground yesterday, like it might open and swallow her whole. You boil the beans slowly, carefully. You save the apples for last. When they're soft, you mash them into a paste and mix in a bit of salt. It smells like autumn, like something your daughter might remember as food. When you offer it to her that evening, her eyes light up just a little. She eats more than she did that morning, enough to make you exhale for the first time in hours. You eat too, quietly, quickly, the rest of the beans. You don't touch the second apple. That's for tomorrow. As the fire dies down, your daughter whispers, "You first next time." You nod, lie. That night you dream of an endless table with a single bowl in the centre. You and your daughter sit across from each other, both pushing the bowl toward the other. You wake with your stomach still empty, but not your hands, not yet. You don't notice the singing at first. It's faint, so faint you think it might be the wind or the creaking of old wood under frost. But then it drifts again, softer than breath, winding its way through the morning mist. You pause, your hands wrist deep in a bowl of cold water, and you listen. Yes, there it is. A voice, then another, thin, unsteady, but undeniably human. You step outside, the air is zolboljo, smoke curls from only 2 chimneys in the village today, the rest are dark, silent. The snow hasn't fallen yet, but the sky looks ready. That heavy grey that makes even the crows stop squawking. You follow the sound slowly, cautiously. You don't want to interrupt. You don't want to be seen. You just want to know where it's coming from. It leads you to the edge of the chapel, not the front, where the monks hand out soup when the bell rings, but around the side, near the crumbled cloister wall where the moss grows thick even in winter. A group has gathered, mostly women, mostly old. Kneeling in the cold, their hands clasped tight, eyes closed. Some have rosary beads, others just bits of twine. One has a small wooden cross, carved from what looks like a table leg. They're singing in Latin, or something close to it. The words are slurred, misshapen from hungry mouths and cracked lips, but the melody holds. It's a lullaby, a funeral, a prayer, maybe all 3. You watch, half hidden behind a tree, not sure why you feel so out of place. You've prayed before, of course. Everyone has. It's built into you, like hunger. But this is something else. Not desperate pleading, not bargaining, something deeper. A ritual as old as frost. When one of the women notices you, she gestures gently, inviting you to join. You hesitate. Then you kneel beside them, folding your hands together, though you can't feel your fingertips. You don't know the words, but you hum the tune. You don't know the point, but you follow their rhythm. Afterward, no one speaks. They just stand slowly, brushing snow from their cloaks. The oldest woman presses something into your palm before turning away, a small pouch, rough cloth tied with string. You nod your thanks. She says nothing, only pats your arm. When you open it later, back home, you find dried chamomile and a few strands of what looks like licorice root. Enough to brew a single weak tea. It tastes like warmth, even though it barely has any. Your daughter drinks half the cup and sighs. There was singing, she says. You nod. I heard it too. They were praying. Yes. For food, you pause. Maybe for peace. She looks confused. Peace doesn't fill your belly. No, you say, but it helps while you wait. That night she asked for a story. Not a new one, but an old one. Something you told her before all this began. You pick one without thinking. The tale of the little goat that tricked the wolves by singing a lullaby so sweet, the wolves forgot they were hungry. She listens with her eyes closed, breathing slow and shallow. When it ends, she asks if the goat survived. Of course you lie. She became a queen. She smiles barely. The truth is, song has returned to the village in small, strange ways. You hear it more now, these last few weeks. Humming while waiting in line. Whispers of old ballads over empty pots. Rhymes spoken to children who don't know what they mean anymore. A man passed you yesterday, muttering a poem to himself. A harvest chant from years ago. His eyes were glassy, his mouth dry, but the rhythm of the words still lived in his throat. There's a debate, because of course there is, about how people use superstition and ritual to cope with famine. Some scholars say it was a way to control the uncontrollable. Others believe it was a form of resistance. A way of saying we're still here, even when everything else is gone. You don't care which theory wins. All you know is that when your daughter sings to herself in her sleep, the hunger feels a little quieter. Later that week, the snow finally falls, not heavy, just a dusting, like powdered ash across the roofs and fields. Everything goes silent, even the wind. You walk through it with care, your footprints the only ones visible. At the church door, a monk hangs a small bundle of dried herbs on the lintel. Sage and bay are twisted with thread. Protection, he says. From what, you ask? From giving up. You don't laugh, you understand. That evening a neighbour knocks. Her hands are raw and bleeding from the cold, but she carries a tattered scrap of paper in her fist. She unfolds it and shows you, words scribbled down from memory. A hymn her mother used to sing. She asks if you'll help her remember the tune. You do your best. Your daughter joins in. The sound is thin, reedy, off-key, but it grows. By the end, all three of you are humming in the dark. There's no food left that night. No broth, no stew, just water and 2 stale crusts, but the sound lingers, even after sleep takes you. A kind of echo in the quiet. Not hunger, not cold, just memory and a voice that refuses to stop speaking. The road is busier than it should be. Not bustling, not crowded, nothing like the harvest seasons you remember, when carts rolled by thick with hay and laughter, children chasing chickens into ditches and merchants calling out over sacks of beans, but busier still. The quiet kind of busy. The kind that signals things are breaking loose. Things are falling apart. You see them while you're foraging near the tree line, figures moving through the mist along the old road, wrapped in too many layers, bent under bundles and sacks, heads down, feet dragging. Not villagers. You don't recognise their shapes. And these days, you know every face in your village, even the ones you wish you didn't. These are travellers. Refugees, really. Though no one uses that word out loud, they don't stop. They don't ask for directions or food or shelter. They just keep walking slow and steady, like ghosts that haven't decided where they're going yet. A man pushing a barrow filled with rags and pots. A woman carrying a limp bundle that might be a child, or maybe just everything she owns. One boy trudging behind the group, barefoot in the frost, and his eyes fixed on nothing. You don't call out, you don't wave, you just watch. Later you hear them again, camped in the woods past the far hill, their fire barely flickering in the dusk. You see the smoke first, then the faint sound of voices. No singing, no stories, just the crackle of flame and an occasional cough. That night you tell your daughter to sleep close to the hearth. You wedge the door shut with the firewood pile. It's not that you expect danger, not exactly. It's just that fear clings to everything now, and you can't afford to be generous. Not anymore. The next morning the travellers are gone. No trace left behind, but a circle of trampled grass and a burned patch of earth. You check it anyway. Not for them, for what they might have left. A fishbone, a peel, anything. You find a shard of pottery and a rusted spoon. You take the spoon. This isn't new, not really. You've seen travellers on the road before, wandering monks, soldiers returning home, shepherds pushing flocks to distant markets. But now the movement feels different. Heavier. Less like a journey and more like an exodus. There's talk in the village about where they're all coming from. Some say the southern towns are worse off than you are. Others say the river valley flooded again, wiped out the granaries. One man insists he saw carts full of dead being pulled from the next shire over, stacked like cordwood. No priests, no prayers. You try not to listen, but it gets harder each door. Historically, famine didn't just empty bellies. It emptied homes. Whole villages vanished. People fled not just hunger, but disease, war, taxation. There are accounts of hamlets with no one left to bury the dead, of settlements taken over by wandering families who simply moved in and claimed what was abandoned. Some scholars argue that these travelling poor were treated with pity, even kindness. Others point to laws passed specifically to keep them out. Bans on vagrancy, on outsiders gathering near markets or wells. Some towns even posted guards at the gates. You wonder which side your village would fall on, if you were the one arriving hungry at the edge of it. The truth is, you're not far from becoming them. If the stew runs out, if the roots dry up, if the monks shut their doors for good, there won't be a choice. You'll have to leave too, join the walking, wrap your daughter in layers and start down the road with a bundle on your back and no destination. Just the vague idea of somewhere else. But not yet. Not today. You make a trade that afternoon with one of the older women on the East End. She's kept to herself since her husband died. But today she offers you a half-full jar of grease and a dried strip of something that might be pork. You give her 3 pieces of bark bread and the last of your dried sage. You cook it over a small fire, just enough to warm the grease and soften the meat. The smell is rich and fills the hut like memory. Your daughter's eyes go wide. You cut it into thin slices and serve it with a broth made from boiled roots. She chews, slowly, reverently. You do the same. It's the closest either of you have come to meet in weeks. After the meal, you sit by the door, watching the road again. More travellers pass. A pair of young men with rope belts and patched cloaks, a boy pulling a sled with a child bundled tight. One stops to drink from the stream. You almost go out. Almost offer her a sip of the broth. But you don't. You can't. Your daughter watches from the window. Where are they going? She asks. Anywhere, you say. Away from here. She nods like that makes sense. And it does. Far too much. That evening you sharpen your old knife, not because you expect to use it, but because it makes you feel like you still have teeth. Like you can still say no. Still draw a line somewhere in the snow. Your daughter curls against your side and whispers, "We won't leave, will we?" You pause, then lie. No, never. That night you dream of a road that never ends. A line of people stretching out into the horizon, all walking away from something invisible. You and your daughter are near the front. You don't know where you're headed, only that you can't stop. You wake before dawn, and the spoon you took from their fire is still in your hand. The year they still talk about, even now, even through cracked teeth and broken memory, is the Great Famine. Not the one you're in. Not this long, drawn-out decay. No, the one from over a century ago, when the rains never stopped and the sun forgot its name. You remember hearing about it as a child, sitting on a woven mat in front of the fire, while your grandmother stirred a pot of something thick and grey. There was no bread, she said, no grain, not a crumb. Mothers smothered their own babies to stop the crying. Men ate their boots, and God didn't answer anyone. You thought it was a story then, a horror tale, something to make children finish their lentils. But now you're living in the footnotes of that year, and you've begun to understand that history doesn't need to be loud to be terrifying. It doesn't need bodies in the street or fiery proclamations. Sometimes it just needs silence, empty fields, bare tables, child with eyes too tired for tears. You sit in the chapel yard with a few others, sun barely up, hands folded for warmth more than prayer. Someone has drawn a crude map in the dirt. It marks nearby villages, rumoured food sources, places to avoid. One is circled in ash, Alwyn Hollow, supposedly abandoned, supposedly full of stored grain left behind in haste. Of course, it might also be crawling with soldiers or thieves or rats the size of dogs. But desperation has made even fairy tales worth chasing again. A young man volunteers to go, his sister craves. An older couple offers him dried apples for the journey. You have nothing to give, so you offer a blessing. Words worn down from repetition, but maybe they count for something. On your way home, you pass the steward's house. The windows are shuttered, the smoke rising from the chimney sweet and steady. Rumour says he has stores sealed behind stone walls, a year's worth, maybe more. Some believe he's waiting to sell them at the peak of desperation. Others say he's rationing them for spring planting, like a responsible man should. You don't know which is worse. You sit on your doorstep and watch the sky, clear today. The sun, faint and watery, still manages to cast shadows. You close your eyes and turn your face toward it like a starving thing. There's a strange comfort in knowing that famines like this have happened before. Not because it makes things easier, but because it reminds you you're not alone, not across time anyway. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 stretched across Europe like a slow, relentless tide. Crops failed, livestock drowned. Roads turned to sludge. Entire regions starved together. Kings prayed, priests fasted, nothing changed. People ate seed grain meant for spring, then cats, then dogs. There are accounts, true or not, of people digging up graves, of highwaymen who didn't steal but killed outright just for flesh, of women leaving their babies at church steps, not out of cruelty but because someone else might have a crumb. And yet the world didn't end. That's the part that haunts you more than anything. It kept turning. People adapted, survived, or didn't. There's still argument among historians about how deep the famine truly went. Some claim the death toll was exaggerated by later writers trying to paint a world ripe for religious upheaval. Others say the numbers were underreported. That villages disappeared entirely, erased not by war or plague, but by simple, ceaseless hunger. The truth probably lies somewhere in the pit between those two extremes, like the last bit of stew scraped from the bottom of a burnt pot, bitter and clinging to the facts only out of spite. You wonder how they talked about it afterward, those who made it through. Did they mention it in passing with a shrug and a half-joke? Did they teach their children to never trust a warm spring or a kind priest? Did they forget, the way people forget things that hurt too much to hold? You look at your daughter now, thinner than she was last month, but still upright, still singing sometimes in her sleep, and you think about what you'll tell her if you both make it through. Will you call it the long winter? The hunger year? Will you name it at all? That evening the boy who went to Alwyn Hollow returns, alone. He carries a small sack, heavier than you'd expect. Inside are parsnips, dried peas, and something miraculous. A wedge of hard cheese wrapped in waxed cloth. He doesn't speak much, just says the place was empty. Door open, no bodies, no fire, like they vanished mid-meal. No one asks questions. The food is divided, carefully, fairly. He's given double for the risk. That night, you boil a few of the peas with the rest of your herbs. Your daughter smells it before she sees it. Her eyes go wide, she eats every bite. So do you. And for the first time in weeks, your stomach doesn't hurt afterward. You fall asleep holding her hand, and your last thought before the dream hits is this. We're going to tell this story someday. Not today, not yet, but someday. You never thought you'd get used to the gnawing. In the early weeks of the famine, hunger was a loud, desperate thing. It screamed in your stomach, made your limbs jittery, your thoughts fogged with need. Now it's quieter, more like a dull knock at the door you've learned not to answer. You still feel it, of course, but you ignore it the way you might ignore a tooth that aches only when you smile. You're sitting by the fire again, turning a flat cake of ground-up lentil husks and oat sweepings over the embers. You made it with a drop of the last pig fat Marta gave you, bless her, and water pulled from the stream that hasn't frozen quite solid yet. Your daughter is still asleep in the corner, her cheeks drawn tight, her breath soft and rhythmic. She lost a tooth yesterday. She cried, not from pain, but because she's afraid the tooth mother won't visit this winter. You told her the tooth mother was stuck in snow, but would send something soon. A smooth stone, maybe. A dream. She believed you. You break the cake in two and set one half aside. She'll need it more than you. It's always that way now, whether you speak it aloud or not. One bite for her, maybe a bite for you, if there's more later. Sometimes you wonder what this whole famine has taught you, not just about the land or God or the fragility of your bones, but about who you really are when the last harvest fails, and more importantly, what's left of you after. You remember when you used to measure life by what you had? Bushels of grain, jugs of ale, the fullness of your pantry in late autumn. Now you measure it by absence, what you've gone without, what you still cling to in spite of everything. One thing that's surprised you is how much you've learned to endure. It's not that the pain has gone, it hasn't, but you've learned the shape of it, the schedule of it. Hunger in the morning, weakness in the afternoon, dizziness when you bend too fast. And always that moment before sleep when your body forgets it's starving just for a moment. As if in the quiet dark, your cells remember how to rest. You know, academically speaking, this kind of adaptation is part of the peasant story. Texts from across the centuries hint at it, how the poor survived on resilience, though those who write about it rarely seem to define what that actually means. Some scholars call it subsistence flexibility, the ability to survive on marginal food, altered schedules and communal networks of care. Others refer to it as coping strategy exhaustion, the point at which every survival trick has been tried, stretched thin and used up. You're somewhere between the two now, still coping, but tired. You step outside into a day that doesn't feel entirely frozen for once. The sky is a watery blue and the snow has begun to melt in patches, leaving behind mud that smells like rot and thawed grass. You kneel beside your small storage hole, brush away the stones, and check the parcel you buried last month. The 3 dried peas you refused to eat. Still intact, still hidden. You smile, not because it's funny, but because it's absurd. Those 3 peas feel like more of a treasure than anything the steward has behind his locked cellar door. Not just because they're of food, but because they're future. Tiny, green promises wrapped in the smell of earth. Back inside, your daughter is awake, rubbing her eyes with one hand and clutching the cake with the other. She eats it slowly, deliberately, and then, to your shock, gives you half of it back. "I'm not hungry," she lies, with that same smile you used to fake for her. You pretend to believe her. Later, the village gathers near the old granary. Not for food, but for a meeting. The steward has sent word. Planting season is approaching, and the Lord expects fields to be prepared. There's a collective kishutz, long and sharp. Who has seed? Who has tools that haven't rusted? Who has the strength to swing a hoe? You raise your hand, even though you're not sure how you'll do it. Maybe you'll trade for seed. Maybe you'll dig with a stick and sheer will. But the idea of preparing soil again, of turning over earth with a purpose, stirs something deep in your spine. Some villagers argue, it's too soon, the ground's not ready, the people aren't ready. Others say it doesn't matter, If they wait, they die. If they try, they might not. You know which side you're on. As you walk home, you pass Marta sitting outside her hut, sharpening a rusted spade with a stone. She nods at you, you nod back. It's not a conversation, but it is an agreement. We keep going, we turn the earth, we risk hope. That evening, you boil water just for the steam, letting it warm the air. Your daughter watches the fog curl and says, "It smells like soup." It doesn't really, but you nod. Then she says something even stranger. "Can we plant something this year?" You hesitate, then pull the parcel from the shelf, the one with the peas. You unwrap it slowly, and her eyes light up. "Can we eat them?" she asks, hungry hope creeping into her voice. You take her hand and shake your head. "We save them," you say. "We plant them." She stares at the tiny, wrinkled peas like they're magic stones. "What if they don't grow?" she whispers. "Then we try again." She smiles. That night, you tuck the peas back into their cloth and sleep with them pressed against your chest, like a heartbeat that hasn't stopped yet. The famine has taught you many things. How to survive, how to endure, how to break and still walk. But mostly it's taught you that resilience isn't loud. It's not about bravery or pride. It's about doing the next thing anyway. Even if the next thing is planting a single seed in soil, you're not sure we'll remember what to do with it. It happens quietly, no parade, no grand announcement. Just a breeze warmer than it should be, brushing across your face as you step outside at dawn. It smells faintly of wet grass and something sweeter, something you haven't smelled in months, the scent of earth waking up. You pause in the doorway, still wrapped in your patched wool cloak, still wary. You don't trust it, not yet. The sky's a soft grey instead of its usual iron sheet, and the frost that usually clings to every surface like a curse is gone. In its place, mud, slick, dark and ugly. But it's not frozen. That alone is enough to make your heart skip. You walk to the edge of the field, where the ground's been broken by hundreds of footsteps through winter, and you bend down, you touch it. The soil gives under your fingers, not much, but enough. By midday, the word has spread. The thaw is real. It doesn't mean the famine's over, not even close, but it means the rules are changing again. The ground isn't an enemy anymore. It's listening. The village responds in its usual slow limping fashion. No bells ring, no orders are shouted, but quietly, one by one, people begin to turn the earth. With shovels dulled by time, with sticks, with hands, the frozen crust cracks like old bread. Underneath there is damp black life. You dig a narrow row near the side of your hut. Not wide, just enough for what you have. You unwrap the cloth and show your daughter the 3 peas. She holds them like they're jewels, whispering to each one. The planting feels ceremonial, almost sacred. You press each seed into the soil gently as if it might bruise. She waters them with melted snow. You mark the row with a crooked stick. It's nothing, it's everything. Around you others do the same. Marta is out with her bent spade. Thomas the baker is scattering something that looks like carrot seed, though he won't say where he got it. The steward even opens a small section of the Lord's land for communal planting, probably more to avoid riots than out of generosity, but still, it's something. You work until your back aches, and it feels good. Not in a joyful celebratory way, not like a festival, but like coming back into your body after a long absence. You're sore. You're sunken. You're still here. That night your daughter falls asleep quickly, her fingers still dirty from planting. You sit by the hearth, rubbing the stiffness from your hands, and think about the months that just passed. You think about bark bread and cold pottage, about freezing nights and empty markets, about the way people disappeared down roads and into themselves, about how many stayed, about how you stayed, and about what stayed with you. The famine has left scars, literal ones, all on your fingers where frost cracked the skin, in your belly where hunger burned long enough to leave a memory. But there are other scars too, invisible ones. How you hesitate before eating, even when the food is safe. How your daughter startles awake if there's no firelight. How you still check the sky every morning like you're waiting for it to betray you again. Historians like to tie up events with neat bows. This was the famine year, they say, as if the ending is clean. As if people woke one morning to find grain pouring from the heavens and chickens laying eggs in every hearth. But that's not how it works. The famine doesn't end with a feast. It ends with a seed. With a furrow in the ground and a prayer you whisper under your breath even though you're not sure who's listening anymore. It ends with rationing what's left, carefully. Still boiling bark, still watering soup, but doing it with the knowledge that things might get better. You'll carry the hunger with you, even when you're full again. Even when the fields are green and the grain bends heavy in the wind. You'll remember the feeling of your daughter's bones when you carried her, too tired to walk, the quiet of a village with no song, the shame of turning away a beggar when your own pot was empty. There's a part of you that won't ever trust plenty again, but you'll plant anyway. You remember that old saying, your grandmother's maybe, or someone before her? The one who plants after a famine sows not seeds, but forgiveness. Maybe she was right. Or maybe she was just trying to believe in something the way you are now. Because hope isn't soft, it isn't warm, it's not a feeling, it's a decision. You decide to dig into it. You decide to feed your child before yourself. You decide to save 3 peas in the dead of winter when everything tells you to eat them. You decide to believe that the dirt will remember how to grow again. And if it doesn't, you'll plant again. You lie down beside your daughter and close your eyes, the scent of damp soil still on your hands. You hear the wind shifting outside, less bitter, more curious. Like it too is wondering what comes next. You don't dream of feasts, you dream of sprouts. Just green enough to be possible, just small enough to be real. You made it, not just through one more night, but through the whole storm. Through the long, cold belly of a year that tested everything, your body, your patience, your memory, your hope. You endured. Even when there was nothing left to endure for but a crust of bread or a single cracked pea, you kept going. You didn't crumble. You didn't vanish. You planted anyway. As you lie in the dim warmth of your hut, listening to your daughter's soft breath rise and fall, the fire crackling low in the hearth, you realize something strange. You're not just surviving anymore. You're recovering. Slowly, hesitantly, like a sprout poking out of frost-covered soil, not sure if it's safe to stretch toward the sun. You don't trust this peace, not fully, not yet, but you're learning to live inside it just a little. There's still work ahead. There always is. The field needs weeding. The peas need watching. There are rumours of late frosts and bandits and sickness. And not all of the village returned from that year unchanged. Some never returned at all. But the rhythm is back. Waking, working, eating, sleeping. The simplicity feels holy now, where once it might have felt like drudgery. Even the scraping of your spoon in a wooden bowl feels like music. You've learned that famine isn't just about food. It's about everything you lose when you're starving and everything you claw back when it ends. Kindness, dignity, laughter. The first time your daughter smiled again while chewing something that actually resembled bread, you nearly wept. There will be more hard years, you know that. But this one, the hunger year, you'll carry with you always. Not as a wound, but as a reminder of what you're made of what grows even when the harvest fails. And when people ask you someday what you ate to survive, you'll tell them everything. Bark, roots, regret, silence, kindness, ash, guilt, grace, memory, but mostly hope.